not in a central location, and the building is isolated well. And luckily, no one had any positive case, so we didn't fully shut down. We had some operation going on, but of course, most people have been on. And so it's been, of course, stressful, but I could say we could do some things at least and still keep publishing, so which is good. And as you said, Germany would never shut down fully. We could go outside, and except, of course, many places were closed, but now it's opening back. So yeah, I think they were well prepared so far, and we'll see how it goes. So they will, in June, hopefully, will go back to fully normal.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I've actually visited that Max Planck Institute once myself. Michael Black, I think, was my host.
That's right, yeah. I heard.
Yeah, I'm familiar a little bit with the area. So it's a beautiful, as you pointed out, wooded, sort of secluded kind of place. It must be really, really nice. You've done spectacularly well. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, you were doing well at Carnegie Mellon, but it seems like you've raised the game even higher, right? Is that just my impression, or it seems like you're more highly resourced and just more stuff that seems like coming out?
I mean, of course, as you say, like if this was not for a step up, I wouldn't dare to move all the way with the family and everything. But as you say, it has really worth a lot to move here, both from scientific and in every sense. And more than just the size of the team, the having the funding almost guaranteed, at least for some basic core team, and then just doing curiosity-driven research that you don't have to worry about, funding source or applications directly. It gives us a lot of freedom to go for just the best science and most exciting questions. So that's why we have more resources, more patients, and more people with diverse backgrounds, and even technical staff to support us. So those things all have helped a lot to change. I think those things all change the way you do the science, which is so amazing. Having technicians in the lab, having all the equipment you need. So that affects the quality of data, reproducibility and the continuity of the things. So, but it's been only 5.5 years, so it's hard to say all. And I think the best thing is to see our outcome, and then you can do better evaluation than I can do, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying lines up with, my impression of the papers that I've seen out of your group. I mean, you've always, been able to do really creative things. I mean, I think the ideas have always been there. And like I said, your tenure at CMU was spectacular, but what I see in papers since this move is really still the same creativity, but the technical level is just like incredible. I mean, just all the execution part of it, it seems like that's what's changed. That would be my inference by just looking at the papers. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it's really amazing.
That's a great point. Indeed, one of the biggest factors that also determined that is now I have around 20 postdocs who have backgrounds in every field that we need expertise. And that is, we can go deeper and deeper in biological questions, in material questions, in control robotics. So it's because in universities like in Carnegie Mellon and everywhere, you're mostly you have mostly great PhD students, which are all good and deep in what they do, but you cannot have PhD students in every field of science you need. And so yeah, in that sense, definitely we are enjoying going deeper in many different aspects of the problems we are working on.
Yeah. How do collaborations work there? I mean, these Max Planck Institutes, it seems like you have these massive groups. How do you interact with one another, and how do you interface with, let's say, the European university community and that type of thing? Do you get isolated at all? It doesn't seem like that's been a problem, but it's kind of something I've been curious about,
Yeah, the only main difference from my university days is we are not in a university campus anymore, and we have only finite number of directors and groups, within the institute. And as you say, the collaborations are the really core activities we do locally and also globally to enjoy more science and research. But the Max Planck system is built all about collaboration. So since we have the resources, both with the local universities and also everywhere else, we can send people immediately. We don't have to worry about having a project funding. And we have a guest house. So just building there, you see from my window is a guest house. So visitors come here, stay from 1 month to 6 months, a year even sometimes. So basically, in that sense, we try to work with the best people around the world when we need collaborators. And German universities are also very collaborative. And cultures are a little bit different, of course, but still, I can say we have been enjoying a lot of different collaborations with different people within Germany, but also within around the world with different groups.
Yeah, that's great. So you probably have staff like technicians or scientists as well, right, as part of your broader team. How has that worked out? That's also a key difference between kind of a university-oriented operation and what you're able to do in your current position, I guess, right?
Exactly. I have around 5 technical staff, and then there is a scientific service group working with us, and of course with everyone in the institute. So those staff people, the great thing is they are permanent. So you don't have to worry about they come and go, and they're very good at what they do. I mean, if you hire a technician here in Germany, they graduate from a technical school which is specialized in that topic. So they're amazingly specialized and skillful. That gives a very high quality technical work and continuity. So, and also they transfer many things from the students and postdocs if you want to keep in the group. Definitely helps a lot. That is unfortunately lacking in most of the universities.
So you have like an electronics person, a mechanical person. Is that kind of how you set it up? Maybe software or data person?
Exactly. So within our each own groups, we have our technical staff specialized in our topics, but then we have these joint groups. Let's say we have a robotics service group that they have all the mechanical, electronics type of people who helps for prototyping. We have a medical group now that I created that is expert in medical imaging. So they help with different expertise, but within my own group, I have biological technicians for bioresearch and microfab technician for my micro nano fabrication research, and some magnetic and fluidic testing and system kind of engineer. And also MRI is now a big thing now. We acquired recently that now the technician for MRI, scientist for MRI. You know, all these things are amazingly neat staff to do just get the equipment work in some complicated systems like MRI. So, but we are luckily now settling down to have the right team to really go deep in MRI physics and instrumentation and medical imaging also in parallel to help for our medical research.
That's amazing. So I saw it from your CV, you spent a little time at the Wyss Institute, and I know they have staff sort of engineers as well. Like, what are the similarities and differences? I mean, it's like a different setup, but I don't know, do you have any like perspectives? That's like the closest thing that I know of in like a more traditional university environment in terms of that base staff, you know, that's kind of specialized in working with the faculty, but maybe it's more distributed. I don't know.
That's a great example. Indeed, that's also, I had the experience that I really liked a lot. And at that time, I really saw the difference of having engineers or staff as a scientist, but also as a technical staff within an institution where you can get expert help rather than trying to get your students or postdocs learn these things. So they have similarities with this kind of system, although the funding source is fully different and it's very focused. So the Max Planck system in that sense is more government funded or state funded, and it's much broader as an institution. So, but that's a great example, and I think other close example is maybe ETH has some staff support, not as much as here, but they have some technical staff, and also they can have one scientific staff there that I'm learning right now.
Yeah.
But a few examples as universities that you can get such funding automatically from your, let's say, contract. others always need to get it from different grants or other sources.
Yeah, very interesting. So tell me a little bit about your new position or your affiliation with ETH Zurich. We were exchanging some emails earlier this morning. What's the nature of that, and how do you interact with the folks there?
Yeah, before that, let's say one big difference here I have with compared to a tenured professorship in any university like Carnegie Mellon is I'm now a director, that I'm not anymore a tenured professor. So in that sense, we have a permanent position, but we are not any university professors. So then we are allowed to have affiliations with universities locally and also with the other places that scientifically makes sense. In that sense, I keep some adjunct affiliation with Carnegie Mellon still. University of Stuttgart, I have an honorary professorship. And then now I started to have some professorship position in Istanbul in Koç University, where they have a school of medicine, which is very new, very top, that I really like to work with doctors directly, that I'll show you later in the talk. That enables me to access the medical school in the sense of people, ideas, applications directly as an affiliated professor rather than just collaborator. And then ETH came up recently that will enable me to graduate my students from ETH. That will increase even the quality of my students here. Plus, I will work with Institute for Biomedical Engineering there, which are amazing in medical imaging and many other fields that I would like to collaborate with. So that's just a new position that I just started. Again, we can have these site affiliations as long as time commitment is not more than 20%.
Yeah. And so is that the main mechanism by which you get PhD students, is through these university appointments?
Yeah, that's the main difference than being a professor. Now, as a director or as a Max Planck Institute, we cannot graduate PhD students directly. Mm-hmm. So we fund them, they do all their research. But in the German system, there is no course load in PhD programs. But then you need to find a university to graduate them. Typically, our neighbor university, University of Stuttgart, many of my students will graduate from there. But then through ETH and also maybe Koç University one day, I can then get them graduated from those schools. So yeah, I mean, that's the main thing, that we always need a university to pass the requirements of the PhD and then get their diploma. Otherwise, we cannot provide it.
Yeah, and with a faculty appointment, it bypasses a requirement to have a co-advisor. You can be kind of the sole advisor and then just do it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, that's ETH appointment, for example, or others enable me to advise my own students in those schools directly without any other co-advisor or another advisor there. So that makes life easy and much efficient. So that will be.
Metin, I have a question. This is Jimmy Xia here. How are you? I have a question. So if we want to have, let's say, joint PhD degree program or programs of that sort, would Max Planck be the partner, or maybe the University of Stuttgart has to be involved?
We will, as an institute, we will be the partner, and that's a very great point, because one main mechanism we use is joint PhD programs with universities within Germany, local ones, but also international ones. So at Carnegie Mellon University, for example, I spent a few years to persuade them, or they also they were very excited to create a joint PhD program that we have now, active program, where students start there for 2 years, but the agreement is made between my institute and the university, of course, the president of the university, in a way that we have a plan which typically involves around 1.5 to 2 years in the given university. The student needs to stay with the advisor there for collaborations and then getting requirements done, and then they come here and then they do their research in our institute for 2 years or more. And then they get their degree from the university, and then we have close partnerships. So we have such a program with ETH, and that's how also my affiliation started or happened. We have a joint PhD program with ETH, Carnegie Mellon, and Cambridge type of universities that if there are any interests, please let me know. We can arrange it through our institute as long as there's interest from both sides.
Sure. Thank you.
So Jimmy Zhigang, just to review what my responsibilities are here. So I'll introduce Metin starting in, I guess, 7 minutes. Is that right? And then after the talk is over, there will be an open question and answer period. And what will I be doing during that time exactly?
So we will promote people who have questions to the screen. And you call on people.
Okay. John will select the people to ask the question. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And how will I call on them? I'll just verbally, identify them by name and let them take it from there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there may be many people who want to ask questions. We cannot allow too many people to speak simultaneously. So you have to point or verbally say, blah, 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 you please ask your question.
Do I have to unmute them or something, or will they be able to unmute themselves?
Yeah, I'll help you. You can also unmute them.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
You actually have full control. You can also mute them if you find that one person is making a lot of noise without muting his or her microphone. You can just mute that person.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do that.
Metin, so where did you study your PhD?
I am a weird case. So I did my PhD in University of Tokyo in Japan.
Oh, yes, now I remember. Yes.
How
did that happen?
When I was looking for PhD programs, I was doing at that time intelligent robotics, and I was really trying to be different. That all of my friends all went to US for PhD, and I said I'm looking for something different. And Japan was great in robotics, but I never had any clue how you can go Japan. But then my first conference presentation in an international conference, the session chair was a Japanese professor, well-known guy. That after my talk, he came and he said he could give me a fellowship for PhD. I said, why not? Then I was in Japan in 6 months with Japanese, with no idea, but it was a lot of adventure and fun, I can say. And University of Tokyo was very special, and I had a lot of fun with the people and science and everything there.
Yeah, and then sometime later, light come to you, and you come to United States.
No, I mean, of course, I was always interested in US. Then, for postdoc, I had many good options in US with MIT, Berkeley, and others. And Berkeley was, the best place for me at that time, also in the sense of miniature robots. And then I joined UC Berkeley as a research scientist for 3 years.
Were you affiliated with Ron Fearing? Was that?
Yeah, I was his postdoc. Yep.
Okay, right.
And we had projects with Bob Fool and Michael Dickinson, and amazing projects, amazing people there. And even I taught there. So I had my first teaching experience at Berkeley as a lecturer for a semester.
That was the heydays of geckos, right?
Exactly. That was the time gecko research started at Berkeley. And it matched my background because my PhD was about nanomanipulation and surface physics and a lot of adhesion friction. And then, I joined to the project with Bob Fool and all others. And I did the synthetic part, and Keller Autumn did the biological part. I did the
clear even in the beginning that you guys are going to mimic gecko and do nano micro fabrication. Was that clear in the beginning?
Not really. It was a DARPA project. It's not DARPA projects. The program manager said, look, I want a robot like geckos climbing on walls. And then everyone figured out that you need the material to make a robot to climb. And then, yeah, I mean, all these iterations, and because the project started before I joined, and then I first worked on the mechanical flying insect robot project. I was hired for the flying robot project. Indeed, Rob Wood was Pearson at that time in that project. I was the first postdoc. I started with that project, and I still did that for 3 years, and then I moved to Gecko project also. But yeah, I mean, because nobody knew how to make those structures at that time, I figured out the best was doing the first structures with nanomanipulation because of my PhD experience. So that the first Gecko structure was indeed made by me in 2001 or 2, the PNAS paper. And that proved the concept of van der Waals force and models and experiments. And then we could make much fancier structures afterwards.
Yeah, it was amazing. Just looking from remotely outside. I remember I first saw you at a Gordon conference. You gave an amazing talk.
Thanks. Yeah, that was 2002 or so. Yeah, that was before I moved to Carnegie Mellon. Yeah, I enjoyed really that Gordon conference. It was amazing. I learned a lot with all you guys and Herbert Hugh and all the best guys in edition. So I really liked that conference, and I tried to join as much as I could.
So were you involved in this COINS Center, Center of Integrated Micromechanical Systems that Alex Settle was leading?
That is, I think, after me. So I left there.
After you, okay.
To,
and Arun Mazumdar was an associate director for the center. Pei-Dong Yang was an associate director for the center. Very successful center, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Berkeley has so many things going on every time, so yeah. All right, so is my voice?
Yeah, I think we can get started, Metin. If you're ready, I'll make an introduction and then kind of hand it over to you, if that makes sense.
Sounds great.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone to this EML webinar. It's a real honor for me to have a chance to introduce our speaker today, Professor Metin Sitti. I've known Metin for a number of years, been a big fan of his work, spanning from surface adhesion to micro robots and everything in between. He's an incredibly creative and gifted researcher. Has been kind of at the forefront of robotics for many years by now. And I've been aware of his work for a long time, but I got to know him a little bit better when I recruited one of his PhD students into my group as a postdoc, Suk Kim, who turned out to be really spectacular and was able to accomplish a number of really impressive things with me, and added on top of his experiences in Metin's group. He landed a number of faculty positions, eventually joined the faculty in mechanical engineering at University of Illinois, is now a tenured faculty member there. So Metin and I are connected through Suk and through the literature and just common interests, in material science and robotics and intelligent systems. So I think he'll present a really fascinating talk today. But before he gets started, I'll just make a few comments on his history, because he's a really unique guy in a lot of ways and has really amazing career trajectory. Starting with undergraduate and master's level work in electrical engineering back in Turkey. And then he took a very unusual path to Tokyo, University of Tokyo, where there are lots of amazing researchers in robotics, and received a PhD there in electrical engineering. Then moved back, this time to the U.S., joined Ron Fearing's group at Berkeley, spent some time there, joined the faculty at Carnegie Mellon, so was in Pittsburgh for a while. Then moved to Germany in his current position as a director at the Max Planck Institute in Stuttgart, and now has a number of different faculty appointments in Switzerland, in Turkey, maintains an interface to Carnegie Mellon as well. And he's just had a spectacular run, I think especially over the last 4 or 5 years, just really mind-blowing stuff, creative stuff, but with incredible scientific and technical depth as well. The types of papers you read them and you're just like smile comes across your face and you're thinking, wow, that's a really cool idea. But it's beyond just the idea. It's really the base foundational science up under it that makes it even more impressive. So I won't say anything more. We're just going to hand it off to Metin, and I think everybody will enjoy this presentation. So Metin, it's all yours.
Thanks very much, John, for your great and kind introduction. And thanks EML for organizing these webinar series. It's an honor for me to give a talk today on small-scale robotics, especially soft-bodied ones. So yeah, I mean, I'll just get started, and I will start with some introduction in generally about intelligent systems, because my institute is specialized in this field and robotics is an important part of intelligent systems research. But I will start with a little bit about general intelligence and then talk about my specialty and my interests in physical intelligence. So first, let's start with biological systems, looking at from single cell level of different cells and bacteria or microorganisms to multicellular systems. If you look at insects, vertebrates, invertebrates, and even mammalians, and at different length scales, and even in collectives, we know or we believe that they are intelligent. And intelligence, as you know, is a notion that is scientifically very hard to define. But it's been so exciting and interesting field, especially these days, because we like to achieve, like these animals, they can survive in very complex environments. They can think, they can decide, they can plan, they can dream. You know, there are many things they can do that robotic systems cannot do these days still. But first is like, what defines that they are intelligent? In our institute, rather than a very high level definition, we have a more functional definition of intelligent systems, both in biology and also in synthetic robotic systems, is they first perceive the environment. So all these biological and also synthetic systems, they need to sense environment, they need to interpret the environment by sensors. And then they can use some control methods to act. So the action could be moving in the environment, manipulating the environment, or changing the environment. And those actions will then be used to learn, because out of these actions, there will be information created. That information will be stored and processed in our brain, in the case of humans, so that we can learn by time, we can evolve, we can adapt, we can predict, we can do many high-level, even abstract thinking. That is amazing, that differentiated us from many other animals. So, and this loop continues all the time. This is always a continuous process of perceive, act, and learn. That's what we can say is the main principle of becoming intelligent. So then in my case, I'm very interested in small scale, even cellular scale and insect scale intelligence. So then this is a video of an amoeba, a single cell, which has no neurons. It's trying to do phagocytosis, means trying to eat this plant cell. If you look at here, this amazing complex behavior here is amoeba is sensing this plant cell with the chemical sensors around its membrane, cell membrane, and then acts by deforming its body. In this case, it has all these, of course, biological motors inside that creates actin myosin type of biological actuation that changes the body formation and creates crawling locomotion. And then if you watch it, it's doing this all very in a feedback way, control way, that eventually it will eat the plant cell. That is the main task that it's trying to achieve. So this behavior is amazing that no synthetic system at the moment can achieve the same thing. And here, there is no really centralized brain that is giving all the actions or the commands about control and also decision-making and learning. So this is one speculative slide I'd like to share, that I'm currently in this pandemic crisis. I'm trying to use my home office times to come up with some perspective article on physical intelligence. And I've been reading a lot about evolution of species and how intelligence has appeared in different animal species at different time scales. So one thing I'd like to provocatively bring up that might end up not fully correct or is just some part of the intelligent system definition is, let's say that if we start from single cells, where life started around 3.5 billion years ago, As you know, the first organisms, single-cell organisms, were in ocean, like bacteria. And then there were photosynthesizing cells laterwards. That was 2 billion years ago. And these guys started life in oceans. And then around 500 million years ago, we started to see multicellular organisms like jellyfishes and other organisms. And then these 500 million years ago systems started to have specialized neural cells that the single cells didn't have, and also some plants didn't have, and also some invertebrates like fungi and some other multicellular systems might also not have any neural cell. But evolution figured out when you get bigger size scales, specialized neural cells can increase complexity and adaptation in changing environment and conditions. So in that sense, we see that neurons started first as decentralized neurons in the bodies, appeared in these small organisms first. There were hundreds of them, but they were not centralized. Then in jellyfishes and other more complex organisms, indeed not jellyfishes, but in insects, let's say, brain started to happen, that a centralized organ with a network of very complex neural cells that were on the order of hundreds of thousands in the case of some small insects. If you go vertebrates, hundreds of million, and if you come humans, tens of billion. These neural cells created what we call neural intelligence. And as I said, at the very beginning, we had only physical intelligence that I said that I will define next, where there was no neural computational intelligence. Then evolution figured out specialized neural networks with centralized and decentralized way can increase the complexity and intelligence. And then that started to appear and increase the complexity further, a more exponential way. And then overall intelligence of the biological systems became amazing and has been all evolving. So the neuron number, brain size, and brain weight, and many other factors determine how intelligent you can be in the biological systems, which is also, of course, highly size dependent. So in my group, my department is called physical intelligence because what I believe is, first, let me define the physical intelligence, what I mean by it. Rather than having the intelligence in the brain mainly, we all know that our body has also encoded intelligence in it, which are perceptional, action, and adaptation-related properties that physical agents like robots and animals have to also create intelligence. So in that regard, as I showed in the previous chart, physical intelligence started at the very beginning of origin of life, and then neural computational intelligence appeared to increase the complexity much more. But then question is, even now, where we have in the evolution, how much physical intelligence matters, how much computational intelligence matters. And if you look at the intelligence research these days, it's mainly focused on computational intelligence. But what in my group and also in many colleagues around the world, we believe in addition to computational intelligence, physical intelligence is also very important, and especially depends on the size scale. So let's start with the centimeter and even human type of larger length scales. As we know, because of evolution of the brain and spinal cord, both centralized and also peripheral neural system, computational intelligence is really dominant in our intelligence. However, our body still has many intelligent behavior that I'll mention, which minimizes the load in computational intelligence or complements it. And these are, of course, all my hypotheses, let's call. And if you go milliscale systems in both biological and also synthetic robotic systems, we start to have limited capabilities in the sense of powering, actuation, computation, in the sense of having integrated to our body. And that's why then integrating physical intelligence more and more on the physical body becomes as important as the brain computational intelligence. So that's why milliscale, you see that they are both important. If you go micron scale, which is cell scale, there is almost no onboard powering, actuation, computation in the sense of synthetic systems. Of course, biological ones have many also onboard capabilities at that scale. However, still there is no neural computation going on. So everything is happening in the hardware, in the body of the organism, but also in the body of the robot. So that's why my specialty also is small-scale robotics. In the milli and also micron scale systems, that's why I underline them. where physical intelligence become dominant or as important as computational intelligence. So in that sense, I'd like to discuss about physical intelligence and how to create it in robotic systems. So one great example of physical intelligence, which I encountered a while ago, and I met the artist 2 years ago in a conference. I was giving a plenary talk, and he was also the plenary talk in the same session, Theo Jansen in Netherlands. He is a kinetic sculpture artist. He created these machines, pure mechanical, that survive or live, in his saying, in the beaches of Netherlands. So they harvest wind energy. As you see, these structures here harvest wind energy. And then those harvested energy turns into mechanical motion of the legs, which are inspired by human walking. But of course, he optimized it with some algorithms to create walking machines, pure mechanical. There's no electronics even, or there's no brain. So then he also showed he could make sensors integrated to this kind of, that he calls living machines, that can sense water and then mechanically have a self-regulating control to avoid the sea. Otherwise, they will all go to the sea. And then, let's see, in this case, there's a regulatory sensor feedback and with a mechanical control that will avoid such things. So in that sense, I was amazed and to have a chance to talk and brainstorm with him about physical intelligence. And basically what he does is a really great example at the large scale, how machines can be built and can be kind of smart in the sense of pure mechanical design and materials. So in that sense, just a brief summary of how I envision to create physical intelligence in both biological and synthetic systems is first, our body can self-adapt passively or actively to changing conditions, constraints. So, and for example, a soft-bodied octopus squeezing inside a very small cavity for hiding is an amazing adaptation that is possible with its body. And of course, they have also amazing brain, but they use that physical material properties of their body. They program and even reconfigure their morphology. They can tune their stiffness, they can tune their damping, and even color. So that's what I can call self-adaptation to changing conditions, which is one part of physical intelligence. Another way is we can create sensory and also action, reaction properties on our body by responding to external stimuli or external forces. So that means if I use or if we use stimuli responsive materials or structures on our biological or synthetic systems, they can respond to stimuli in the environment, which could be light, changes in the humidity, changes in the temperature or pH. Or they can also react to contacting forces, mechanical stress, fluidic or airflow. And as you might know, Venice trap is an amazing plant example where there are tiny sensory hairs inside. When an insect comes in, the amazing thing is when insect touches for the first time, they don't close. They have basically a computational system there. After multiple times of sensory signal, then the plant thinks that really insect is inside because they don't want to have a false closing, which will be very detrimental for their survival, so that they can sense it with no brain and then eventually close it and grab the insect and eat it by the chemicals they have. So that's a very important property, which is enabled by the stimuli responsive structural and material properties embedded in the plant itself. So if you look at all these things, we talk about self-sensing, self-adaptation. So in that sense, our key word here is autonomous self-behaviors that we can create using smart materials, structures, mechanisms, and physical interactions. So for example, here, an example is, for example, bacteria swarms. So here we see self-organization because of the fluidic interactions. There is no, again, any computational decision-making here. There's of course chemical communication, but there is the physical fluidic forces that induce an organized swimming behavior enabled by all physical interactions. So self-regulation, like in the case of the walking machines and many things I'll show you, self-propulsion, self-healing systems, self-cleaning, self-degrading, all these systems can have embedded behavior in the body that can induce type of physical intelligence. So final examples is even besides just doing sensing, acting, we can also have embedded control and computation. Another historical example is this self-regulating control systems. The history of control systems, of course, before electronics was pure mechanical. So that's why it's great always to go back our history and understand and learn from it. So this self-regulating control mechanism, when there was any kind of, let's say, heat engine with a turbine, that the spinning of the turbine, when there is a speed change, will create different inertial forces that will move this system higher, depends on the mass that you tune in the system. And when it spins faster, it will get the system higher. And when it is higher with the mechanism you have, you will open the valve and get some heat out so that you can reduce the speed, so that you can have a constant speed rotation system purely mechanically controlled. So it's a great example of how mechanical systems can be self-regulating and controlling themselves just by physical means, that we can make different versions of these systems even nowadays. And you can see them in some fluidic computation systems, logic systems. They are not using even electronics to create these control and computation behavior. Memory is really essential component of intelligence that many of us just neglect or forget. Any biological or synthetic system without memory cannot be at least long-term behaving in an intelligent way. So that's why short and long-term memory can be embedded both neurologically or mechanically or physically using bistable structures, different viscoelastic materials like, as you know, these memory foam, or granular jamming type of, again, mechanical systems where you can induce shape deformation that can be memorized for some duration. And even these days, we see great examples of microfluidic droplet systems that can also create some memory. So overall summary of introduction is really we want to create physical intelligence in robotic systems inspired by animals. And then my main research question today will be, soft body systems, can they be a great example of physical intelligence platforms in the sense of both robotic soft systems, also soft animals? So I'll try to show that today. So, because if you look at these very diverse biological soft-bodied animals, you can see there are amazing dynamic behavior in the sense of jumping, walking, crawling, undulating in the micro scale like sperms, and in the macro scale like jellyfishes and octopi. So you can see all this amazing diversity that evolution figured out as an important, again, property that can create a lot of body intelligence. So if you kind of look at the basic properties of these soft body systems, is first, they can physically adapt to changing conditions, as I mentioned, and that is achieved by what we call shape programming. So an octopus can program their arms as swimming legs or manipulating legs, or even, as you see here, like a walking leg, depends on the need of their locomotion or other desired tasks. So they can create very diverse and drastically different behavior. So if you have a rigid system, they are typically boring. So they are typically the changes you can have are not highly different. So they are typically linear even. So soft systems are highly nonlinear. So that means they can create very diverse and drastically different behavior that I'll show you. So those diversities then can also create multifunctional behavior. As I mentioned, octopus arms can be used as a manipulator, as a leg, as a swimming arm, and many other things. And finally, this is more important for robotic applications, is soft systems are highly safe to interact. As you know, this cartoon and movie, really these days more and more robots are becoming soft, at least in their skin, so that when we physically interact with them directly or closely, to be safe, softness is really essential design property that we like to use. So with these properties, let's start now to design and build soft, small systems. The first component of those systems will be actuators. And this is a very hot area now in the last 10 years or so, how to design and build soft actuators at different length scales. And if you look at this review paper and many others in the field, there are many ways to create stimuli responsive smart soft materials. They can use heat, magnetic or electrical fields, sometimes acoustic fields, light, chemicals in the environment or given chemicals, and air or fluid pressure to create all these different type of actuated active systems. Even these days, we can see cell-driven biohybrid soft actuators also. So these are all amazing developments that will enable us to create self-responding systems in the sense of physical intelligence. So after teaching small-scale robotics a long time at UC Berkeley and at Carnegie Mellon, finally, a last mission in my teaching was creating this textbook on small-scale robotics, where I talk about all different type of actuation methods, sensing methods, locomotion methods, physics of these systems. If you're interested, you can look at this book to learn more in detail. Let's start with some examples in my group, and I'll try to give you most recent, even unpublished results. So a very recent work we have figured out in the sense of soft material-based small-scale robotics and actuation is using proteins from biological systems as robotic components. So this is a great work done with my postdoc Abdon, where we could take squid ring teeth. So this teeth, as you might know, is very strong protein that you can extract it from real squid, or you can even synthetically make them these days. And then we can make a solution of this protein while keeping its basic biomaterial properties. We can mix it with other chemicals and then make layers of them and laser machine to create structures. So this specific structure has inside, besides the protein, has this fuel, HFIP, is a special molecular chemical, which can diffuse to the water in the water surface, which creates a surface tension gradient because of surfactant diffusion. And because of protein structure and properties, we can control very precisely the amount of molecular diffusion time, and so that we can have a very efficient way of diffusing it, because eventually the fuel will be consumed in minutes or hours, depends on the length scale of the device, but it's fully self-propelled. So there is actuation happening because this fuel is interacting with the water and inducing surface tension gradient, which is called Marangoni forces, to propel the device. And you can see length scales from millimeter scale to sub-millimeter scale or micron scale. These kind of propulsions are efficient. But main message here is, rather than the propulsion technique itself, here protein type of biomaterials could be amazing robotic materials to create smart behavior. Because we have other works that is not published yet, in the sense of these materials can self-heal. They can have adhesive properties. They can have many other properties that we can engineer. And since they are biological, they are fully environment friendly. They can biodegrade, so that they are really can be used in medical applications with no problem. So that's why I can say that future robots will use biomaterials also inside. So another recent work just published in collaboration with Ari in Finland, and again done with my postdoc Hamed as the lead person. So here, what we did is we engineered liquid crystal gels, which have specific molecules inside that, when there is light-based local heating, can induce large strains. So the challenge in this field has been in underwater conditions when you use light, since the local heat dissipates so fast, getting fast actuation underwater to create this bio-inspired bending behavior has been very challenging. Then we designed this specific gel that needs very small temperature difference, so that we use very low light intensity relatively with respect to other works, and then induce these large shape deformations. And this is real-time speed. So in that sense, also speed is highly improved also to create many different large deformations. So this is driven by light, which is great technique, but the only drawback of light techniques is, especially if you use UV light, they are not compatible to medical applications, but they are great systems for other applications, like environmental applications. So I want to show you another example in our group that we are working on is in the salt materials. The great thing you can engineer is stiffness anisotropy, besides its material properties of specific material. So this is another recent work in collaboration with Xu Yang at UPenn, led by Zoe Davison in my group. As you might know, in soft actuation, electric elastomer actuators have been very popular since 2000, almost 20 years, where you can take an elastomer and put electrodes on top and bottom, and if you apply very high voltage, it will create electrostatic pressure, and that will deform the shape of the elastomer in a very fast and energy efficient way. However, to induce programmable deformations rather than just contraction expansion, which typically happens isomorphically, what we did in this study, a very simple idea, that if you use a liquid crystal elastomer instead of a silicone or an elastomer, where liquid crystal elastomers, you can engineer and program the alignment of molecules in any desired manner, although it's not so simple. That's why you need a lot of tricks and knowledge of how to align them. But if you can align them and use them as your elastomeric material, and if you apply electrostatic pressure now, rather than isomorphic shape change, it will have very anisotropic shape change in the sense of, in specific direction, it will expand more, in other direction, it will expand less. So that can be induced because mechanically, if you look at in the horizontal, two different directions, you will see that the same material has different mechanical modulus because of molecular alignment of the liquid crystal. So you see that in one direction it's around 60 megapascal, in other direction it's almost 10 or even 15 times softer. So that's why this stiffness anisotropy will induce shape programming that you can create by just simple monolithic material. Of course, you can do more complex patterning than just a simple one direction alignment. So this is, for example, kind of a chessboard. You can align the molecules in the monolithic same material in different directions, and you can stitch them together to create a continuous one surface that when you apply the high voltage, you see that now it deforms, creating Gaussian curvature and other curvatures locally, all in different way in one monolithic material. So as you see with stiffness gradients or anisotropy, we can induce now a passive shape change that is coupled to electrostatic actuation in this specific case. Another recent example that is not published yet, to show you that at the even much smaller length scale, we can program, and in this example, we have a micro ring, which is fabricated in some specific ways that I can't go into details, that this liquid crystal elastomer ring can have different directional molecular alignment in 3D rather than on a plane or 2D. We can program it in different, develop new technique. And that way, when you apply stimulus, and one way is heat change or other way is some chemical swelling, then this ring can induce very different shape deformations, can turn into ellipsoid, can turn into much other different 3D shape, or can get larger. So those are all we can program these days thanks to liquid crystal elastomer molecular alignment properties. Another local material stiffness programming that induces shape programming is in collaboration with architecture department in University of Stuttgart. We recently showed, this is again a very recent paper, where we took cellulose, again another biomaterial, because we really love biomaterials because they are degradable and they are environment friendly and medical friendly. So in this case, this cellulose is hydroxyethyl cellulose, HEC, where if you take this solution and mix it with another chemical, and by controlling the composition of this mixing, you can create different cellulose concentration locally while you're 3D printing that can induce continuous stiffness gradients. Again, there's a lot of details. I will not have time to get into details, but by this type of design of the stiffness gradient of the cellulose during printing, now you can program shape deformations because of that stiffness, anisotropy, and gradient. So let's say, I think these are more clear examples. As you see, the directional stiffness properties are programmed. By the way, we have in this work, we have full simulation work that where we do the design and then implement the printing, and then really it's done not by trial and error, but with conscious design methods. We first figure out stiffness gradients that we need, and then we can print them and show that when you apply any mechanical force or humidity change, that will induce this shape deformation, and programming programmed to the gradient of the stiffness only. It is a monolithic material, as you see, but it has this programmed stiffness gradient that induces these shape changes. So in these cases, as you see, they are all using stiffness anisotropy. Now, another example I want to give before I get into magnetic soft-fluid robots is even these days we can make microscale soft robots driven by cells. This example is a relatively recent work that we take live bacteria or algae or other microorganisms that we can engineer in the lab and attach them, in this case, a red blood cell taken from a patient. So that red blood cell, these days there are established techniques to create a ghost red blood cell where you can make a hole and get rid of the material inside hemoglobin and other materials, and then load them with drugs like doxorubicin cancer drug and magnetic nanoparticles or any other chemicals inside the red blood cell. It's a biomaterial that your immune system will like because they are taken from the patient or a person. Then we surface engineer a red blood cell, and also bacteria is engineered in collaboration with a colleague in another Max Planck Institute, where the bacteria surface has this biotin expressed on the cell membrane, which can stick to the red blood cell using antibody that you can easily integrate. And then there is biotin avidin type of specialized bonding that sticks the bacteria to the surface. But here the trick is you need to stick the bacteria with the cell membrane, not with the tail, then it will not work. So this is an electron microscope image showing an E. coli bacterium stuck to red blood cell using this kind of bonding technique. And now, and also if embedding nanoparticles, which are magnetic, then we can create propelled red blood cells rather than passive red blood cells that are driven by the bacteria attached to the surface, then steered from outside using magnetic fields. So as you see, this system is fully steered from outside by a doctor or by a user so that we can control the direction of motion rather than a random one, so that we can make some medical microswimmers. So this work is amazing in the sense of soft deformation, because red blood cells, you know, by evolution, has very interesting mechanical properties that they can squeeze through microcapillaries. So here we make a demo. You see the red blood cell propelled by bacteria. So bacterium here, there's one, pulls it and can pass it through a 2-micron gap. So this is more detailed fluorescent image. So this is the red blood cell membrane. This is one E. coli bacterium pulling it and deforming it through that small channel like our microcapillaries. This happens only because of soft-bodied physical adaptation to small channels. That also is very important for our survival, so that red blood cells never clog our microcapillaries, so that we can get them going everywhere in the circulatory system. As the medical functionality demonstration of this soft swimmer, what we did is we loaded also, besides magnetic particles, we loaded them with ICG type of basically photothermal chemical agents. When you apply an infrared light from outside, as you might know, an IR light can penetrate the tissue up to 5 centimeters or so. Then we can heat it with the NIR absorption, this chemical, and that will eventually basically blast the red blood cell. That will release the drug inside so that we can do basically chemotherapy, on-demand delivery, plus hyperthermia, because the heated red blood cell can reach the temperatures that we can control precisely. Finally, the same heating, besides delivering the drug, can also kill the attached bacteria, so that after the operation is done, there will be no bacteria in your body left that can be dangerous for your immune system. So in that sense, these are examples to you to show that we can make very small scale, also soft systems using biological cells. As the last example, this is not published in press work. We even engineered macrophages can be taken from patients. These macrophages, as you know, they don't like any foreign object. They try to engulf them like the amoeba I showed at the beginning. But when they engulf or stick to these synthetic objects, we design the synthetic object in a way that they are magnetic and they don't kill the macrophage, but we use a magnetic object to drive the macrophage around as an active system. Macrophages themselves are active, but they walk with a speed of 10 micron per minute. So they're very slow crawlers. With this new technique, we can make them active surface rollers. Their speeds are now much, much faster. They can go very, very high speeds, 3 orders of magnitude faster. And that way we can drive them where we want in the body And these macrophages are also very intelligent, so they can detect cancer cells and many other different signals in the body, and so that we can remotely control them to help us for immunotherapy. So this is an application where we want to do immunotherapy in a targeted way using robotic approach. Okay, so now let's come to the more detailed part of my talk, which will be about magnetic soft small robots. Inspired by the animals I showed you before, which are soft-bodied, we'd like to design and build synthetic soft robots. And in this case, we try to take magnetic approach, and I'll show you why. So we want to make externally magnetically actuated robots, which are inspired by small soft animals. So why magnetics? The great thing about magnetic actuation, as the first property, is it's a long-range wireless actuation technique. So if you have a magnetic body of a robot, you can remotely actuate it so that you don't need any wires. Second, it's highly compatible to medical applications. Our body can accommodate magnetic fields up to 7 Tesla or so, as long as their time gradients are not so fast, that will not stimulate neural cells. We are perfectly fine with magnetic fields for actuation. At these length scales that we work, milliscale and microscale, magnetic forces and torques can be high enough for driving our robots. Magnetic actuation is very fast and very precise and very dexterous. So that can enable us very complicated maneuvers and actuation systems. The one main drawback of magnetic actuation, why you don't see it everywhere, is it needs the generation of magnetic field or gradient, which only is possible typically in a fixed workspace volume, so that you cannot have a flying robot with magnetic actuation because you need to have the magnetic field generated somehow. So in that sense, for these kind of applications of magnetic fields or gradients is the best for medical type of applications where the workspace is fixed, like any volume that you design like human body or any fixed other space. So then if you look at the main physical properties here, so again, our robot has magnetic material inside, which has a magnetization of M. And if assuming uniform magnetization of the material, it depends on the volume of our magnetic material of the robot, then we have a magnetization or magnetic, let's say, moment. And if we apply a uniform field, basically that field will try to steer the magnetic body of the robot to align it so that it will apply a torque. So that torque will align the magnetic direction of the property of the body to the magnetic field direction. So we can create magnetic torque on the body if you have a magnetic body and if you have applied magnetic field. The second actuation method you can do is, at the same time or otherwise, you can apply a spatial gradient of the field, which is, as you see here, only spatial gradient. That spatial gradient can also pull. If you have a magnet and magnetic, again, body, that magnet will create a gradient and that will try to pull the robot. So in that sense, you can pull the robot or you can steer the robot using magnetic fields. So now let's see how we can use it for real actuation of soft robots or soft actuators. In that regard, I'd like to start with the first relatively simplest example of soft actuator design. Let's first take a 2D elastomeric sheet. In this case, as you see, elastomeric sheet is a rectangular shape and it's 2D. And let's solve the design problem of this relatively simplest shape we can have. So what we like to do is we like to put a lot of magnetic particles inside this elastomer, embedded inside, so that we'd like to program the magnetization direction of these magnetic particles along the length in a special way, or in a way that we can assume that we can fabricate it, so that when we apply external fields, which we can precisely control, we like to achieve many different shape deformations. So in that sense, elastic sheet is one sheet that we program its magnetic properties one time, and then by changing by time our remote fields, we like to create many deformations with the same sheet. And you can have 10 deformations, 10 different or 100 different deformations, could be static, could be dynamic. So this is the first fundamental question that we addressed. So in that sense, you first define all the desired shape deformations, which we call kinematics, that you like to achieve with the same sheet at the step one. Then second, mathematically, you represent this all magnetic properties that you want to encode into the elastomeric material, that is this vector. And then by applied remote field and gradient, we want to represent it mathematically, and then create an optimization problem where we want to achieve all these kinematics with all and optimal properties of this MS and the input field. And if the algorithm converges to a suboptimal solution, then we solve the problem and then we can fabricate it. Since this is a mechanical, mechanics discussion, this is a very brief, very basic mechanics going on here. For a large deforming elastic rectangular sheet, the equation for deformation is well known. If you take a segment, that segment will have magnetic torque because of the field you apply. And if you also apply gradient, that will also have a force that can also create a moment arm, and that will also create a torque. And all these magnetic torques will eventually, at this steady state, will create this second order partial differential equation. So, which is functional mechanical properties, shape of this, let's say beam. So, with the given boundary conditions, we numerically solve this so that we can have a relatively quick solution. And then the idea here is, if we mathematically represent these unknown variables of magnetization properties and the required magnetic field and gradient, so we mathematically represent them using Fourier series to be general. Then, without human intuition, we take the same partial differential equation and turn into this partial differential equation as a function of all these Fourier series coefficients. Again, mathematical details are in the paper. Then we can use a computational optimization technique. In this case, we use genetic algorithm, which is an evolutionary algorithm that will create an optimization by starting from different initial conditions, so that it can try to find a suboptimal solution for this given problem. At the end, we solve the problem and find the optimal magnetization and input fields. And then how to fabricate it is a molding technique with laser machining together. We have the geometry of the beam is previously fixed topographically. Then we first create the negative mold. We mold with the elastomer. And then we cut in the width with a laser. The reason we cut, because then we mold only that area with magnetic composite material, which is, in this case, an iron boron microparticles embedded inside a silicon elastomer. Because that way, when you have only these specific patterns are magnetic, then along the length, the magnetic amplitude will be determined by the width of the magnetic part. If everything is magnetic, they will have all the same magnitude of magnetization. But when you have smaller width magnetically along the length, the magnetic amplitude will be less or more in the given segment. So with this patterning, so again, we determine the magnitude, but determining the magnetization direction of the magnetic beam, then we create a 3D printed jig that we, again, computationally solve. And then you press the jig onto this fabricated elastomer with the magnetic region. And after deforming it within the jig, we apply a very high field. And if you open the jig, because it's only elastically deforming beam, and when you take it out, it will become flat again. And you will see that we can create magnetization with different directions and different magnitudes, all enabled with this patented technology of creating magnetic programming. Okay, so now after we create this program, let me show you some case example. In this case, I want to show you an example of an elastic sheet that will deform and undulate like a spermatozoid body undulation. As you might know, sperms, their head is fixed, their tail is undulating with an amplitude increasing at the tip of the tail at a given frequency. So our numerical algorithm design methodology solves the problem and finds that the beam along the length should have this magnetic profile. As you see, it's a complex profile. And this is the input magnetic field you need to apply in X direction is along the length, and also in the Y direction along the height. So as you see, this is a phase difference of a sine wave. After we computationally solve this, we go and fabricate, and now you see the testing of the beam. When you spin the magnetic field, you see that it undulates where the head was fixed. And now if you cut the head from the fixed base, you see that the robot is swimming like a real sperm. So this is a slowed down video to show you that the spinning magnetic field is inducing this undulating body looking like a real sperm. So as you see in this methodology, we could do all this two-dimensional design approach and then fabrication. And then we took that work into the next level by taking that sheet and making it a multimodal locomoting soft robot. Because animals, as you know, they don't have only one locomotion type. They can jump, they can walk, they can swim, they can do many different modalities of locomotion to survive in complex environments. In robotics, that's a big challenge, scientific challenge of making one robot that can do many different locomotion modalities on different environments like terrains. So this was published a few years ago. Let me go over the details of this work. The idea, again, is taken from our previous design concept, where we take an elastic rectangular sheet, but this time the magnetization profile has the same magnitude, but have a changing wave pattern. Of course, this is solved computationally by many analyses first. So as you see, the magnetic profile is a sine or cosine wave. And in this demonstration, we make a prototype around 4 millimeter long and 1 millimeter wide and 200 micron thickness. So here, the main critical finding was this wave pattern is very important and it's very easy to create. In this case, the jig is very simple. You take a cylindrical rod. You first wrap your elastomer with the magnetic particles inside, which were at the beginning not magnetized. After you wrap it around, you apply a very high magnetic field uniform in this direction, and that will magnetize the particles in that direction, and then it's fixed. And when you open the elastic sheet, now you get this wave pattern, and by wrapping it in different ways, you can control this phase difference precisely to create this very tiny elastomeric robot. So here, the body is made out of these hard magnetic microparticles mixed with silicone rubber elastomer. It's very soft elastomeric body. It's water repellent, and it has some surface roughness, also useful. And in this demonstration, the robot is not fully biocompatible because these magnetic particles are not fully biocompatible, or indeed not biocompatible, only the elastomer is biocompatible. So we created the fields for actuation using these type of electromagnetic coil systems that we designed in our lab. As you see, these coils can be designed in a way that when you apply them current, they can create magnetic fields inside this workspace. Here, we have a workspace around with this volume that has uniform three-dimensional magnetic fields that we can precisely program by computer using visual feedback. So if we don't apply any magnetic field, the elastomeric sheet is flat. So, and the total magnetization, when you add up this sine wave or cosine wave of magnetization, is in average 0. So it's because basically it's magnetically nothing effective here. So it's non-magnetic. So if you apply a small magnetic field in this direction, it will create a sine wave. So these are the basic shape modes. If you apply another direction, small magnitude of field, it will create a cosine wave. And when they deform, the total magnetization now is non-zero because now the magnetization vector is not anymore adding up to 0, which is fine. And I'll show you that's in an advantage. The second thing you could do is you could increase the magnetic field magnitude you apply, and then it also depends on the direction you apply that. It can create a U shape or a large V shape. And in this case, you have bigger even magnetization at the end. So with these basic shape deformation modes that we can program with applied fields from outside, we can create different shape morphologies, but then also because total magnetization is now non-zero, we can also use external fields to create body torques. Because total magnetization is non-zero, that means if you apply external magnetic field, you can also apply rotation on the body. So now let's use very basic, very simple shape deformations and body torques to make a lot of interesting locomotion modalities. The first one is rolling. So you make first a large deformation by U shape, and then by applying body torque, now we can have a rolling robot. And the second, which was one of the hardest, is walking, crawling. So in this modality, by the way, you can see the input magnetic fields in the sense of magnitude and the direction in each case. So you see that we apply in the walking a triangular waveform that creates tilting forward, backward, and extending its body. And when you walk like that, the nice thing is you can use your body length to go over obstacles. While you're rolling, you cannot do it, so that you can pass over obstacles in a better way. So these are interesting modalities on solid surfaces. Another interesting modality on ground is jumping. As you can see in many soft-bodied systems and also insects, when they see any high obstacle, they can go over it in the efficient way by jumping. And one of the best jumping modalities is elastic energy storage. As you can see in our elastic body magnetic material, we can apply a pulse of magnetic field that can create this elastic deformation first to stored energy that can be turned into jumping. So here you see even we can do vertical jumping or directional jumping by controlling the programming of the magnetic profile. So another modality is on the air-water interface. If you look at water beetle larvae, they can climb on the water meniscus because when you are such larvae, you want to go ground at some point. And to do that, you need to climb on the water meniscus, which is energy-consuming locomotion. But if you use your shape deformation of the body, because you're soft, you can use the buoyancy because of the induced deformation, can take you with very small energy consumption to the top of the water meniscus, and then you can get out. That's enabled by very simple static shape deformation that creates the buoyancy and lifting. Another very interesting modality is undulating of the body, like I showed in the sperm example. But in this case, the head is also undulating, not fixed in this specific case. And you can see that a lot of animals at the large scale and at the very small scale use body undulation to swim. So the trick here is you apply a very small magnitude of this phase difference of the magnetic spinning, let's say, fields, which creates a sine wave and cosine wave on the shape of the body. And that, since you apply as a continuous waveform, that will create an undulation. As you see, it's a very simple undulation method, but very effective and very useful for swimming. So here, the dynamics are very complex. I want to show you some details. In the paper, we had 90 pages of supplementary information modeling all of the locomotion modalities and their experimental testing. So just show you some testing results to show how nonlinear and complex these locomotion behavior in the case of body undulation. So here what we do is we change the thickness, the length, and the width of the robot rectangular sheet, and then change the frequency or the magnetic field amplitude to see how the robot undulation happens and swimming happens. And the y-axis here is swimming speed. So as you see, when we change the thickness of the body of the robot, you see that by different thickness, you get, by changing frequency, you get nonlinear behavior where at a specific frequency, they get the fastest speed. It's a highly nonlinear system. And the same for different length. In the width, it's also nonlinear, but width is not really important, changing much, but you see that the length and the thickness of the robot will change the amount of speed drastically. For example, in this case, length, if you make the robot longer, it will swim faster, and it will have also a little bit different optimal speed or frequency. But in the sense of amplitude undulation, which we can control by the amount of magnetic field we apply, it's more linear behavior. So as you see, nonlinearity is typically in the frequency response of these magnetic actuators. So then we can also use the body undulation to go in the very constrained tubular environment, like the C. elegans. As you see, they can go in these constrained environments biologically, and we can replicate such behavior in a constrained environment like a tube. Another modality we showed was inspired by jellyfish. This is very basic jellyfish, and I'll show you a more complex one next. That we can, if you undulate the body, in this case, undulation is basically symmetric bending, up and down with a different time, also speed, let's say. When you go down, you want to be very fast, and when you go up, it's slow. So that way you can create different vortices of fluid that can push you up or forward, like the real biological jellyfishes. So summarizing all these modalities, I showed these 7 modalities in the same robot, which had different jumping performance, rolling or swimming speeds, and use energy for, let's say, meniscus climbing. So we have all these results characterized, and you see the design of the shape of the robot affects these performances a lot. And we had also theoretical models, which we had some cases disagreeing because they're very complex models. But eventually we showed that, let's combine everything. The same robot now rolling on the surface, going to the water surface, and only thing we are controlling here in the same robot is external magnetic fields in the sense of direction, magnitude, and the waveform. Now we can create many gates of locomotion, swimming or rolling, and now you can go water surface. As you see, Metis is climbing here by this shape change or deformation. Then you can break the capillary force, and then you can walk on the solid surface. And when you have an obstacle, the best way, like in the case of biological systems, is jumping over it. And you can crawl again on the surface relatively precisely, and you can be steered around. But then if you come into a constrained environment, walking doesn't work anymore. Then you can change the body undulation like swimming and can go through it so that you can be very adaptive to complex environments. So eventually we want to use these soft robots in medical applications. So that's why we also made this simple demo that we took a chicken meat and make an incision, and we put our robot inside and use ultrasound imaging to track its dynamics. So you see that it is rolling in a small tissue incision, and before it was swimming like a jellyfish. And these are all slowed down videos. This robot is really, really fast in the milliscale system. So besides of all these different locomotion modalities, the same robot can also have other functions like gripper. So now the walking robot can grip an object and then roll it around and transport it to the desired location and release it, as an example. So as you see, the Soft-body enables you not only different locomotion modalities, but also other functions. So another example is now we can make more specialized function of make a pocket, put our cargo, let's say drug, and then when we have a specific shape change in the specific direction with a given input, we can eject the cargo in a very precise location by shape deformation control. So these are examples we achieved using very simple elastomeric rectangular bodies. Now I'd like to show you more complex designs. So here, after working on biologically inspired robots for now 20 years or so, this is the first time we could make a jellyfish robot at the same size scale with the same locomotion modality, one-to-one, same with the biological organism. So this is a baby jellyfish, as you see, called Ephora. And then we looked at biological data and created a synthetic jellyfish that can swim exactly like real jellyfish, and it's all wirelessly done. It's the same speed scales and the same length scale of the body, and steerable like the real one. So that this is the first time we can achieve such very biomimetic soft robot at the small scale. The details a little bit is we look at the morphology of the biological jellyfish, baby jellyfish, which has 8 lappets. So these arms called lappets at the given millimeters length scale. So we made a synthetic version of it with a water or air bubble, a water droplet with a bubble inside, air inside, which creates buoyancy because our materials are heavier than biological materials. Then this part is the magnetoelastic actuator design that we designed using our methodology before, but now we have 8 of them. Then we added these passive elastomeric regions where we can create much complicated deformations than just a simple beam with a directional joint. So this joint here has directional stiffness. When you go down, it's very stiff. When you go up, it's very soft. So it can deform a lot. So after doing all these design optimizations, we can deform the lappets of the robot in the same way of the biological system. When you go downward deformation and versus upward, body kinematics is the same with the biological system. And again, here, this directional stiffness joint helps us a lot, creating these non-uniform complex deformation. So after achieving this, you can see that now very fast and slow, downward and upward, basically waveform, we can deform and propel. The fluidic dye here shows the fluidic propulsion details. This is again mimicking exactly the small animal, jellyfish. And then we started to change the parameters because in the robotic system, we can play now to make it much faster in this contraction case or in the recovery case, or we can add extra gliding phase. So we can now play with the gate as we want. The interesting thing is, by playing with these gates, we figured out different performance optimization. So this mode is the most energy efficient mode for default swimming. But when you want to also eat, because these animals need to collect food from the fluid environment, then the collection of that food, let's call objects, and retaining that food under their umbrella to eat them, depends also on this waveform behavior. As you see here, when you have a stronger contraction, you can collect more fluid and more food under your umbrella, and in the other one, need much less. And then to retain it, though this one is not good for retaining, it's only for collecting, but retaining one is the small amplitude one. So we figured out different modes of body motion that can have different functions. Then use that robotically. Now you can see that we can fluidically, pure mechanically, trap these objects, which are very complex shapes, and then transport them without contact using fluidic forces, like inspired by the animal eating the organisms in the fluidic environment. So the new version of this jellyfish robot has a membrane that is fully closing until to the end. And again, the same design with an elastic part, which is active, and then membrane, which is passive elastomer. So this received the best paper award recently. Just the end result, we can still do transport and trapping of objects fluidically using this body deformations. And then because of this membrane now, we can clog tubular region in the body. This could be fallopian tube for birth control or abnormal vessels. And as you see now, it's fully clogged and closed, so these particles are indeed dropping from outside, not from inside. So these kind of, as you see, functional devices are now becoming possible thanks to magnetoelastic soft actuation. So let's skip that one. And now another bio-inspired soft actuator we designed recently that is not published yet, as a collaboration with Patrick Onk's group in Netherlands. We can make cilia-inspired magnetic synthetic cilia arrays. For the first time, we could show that metacoronal waves are possible. So you see here an array of our soft actuators are using the same magnetic field that we apply from outside, but since we design each of them separately, differently, with different magnetic properties, they can undulate, they can deform in an asymmetric way, non-reciprocal way, that can induce fluidic pumping, like the biological cilia. So this is right now on the review work. Just a little bit detail is here. The magnetic profile is, again, very important design detail. And then when you apply a rotating field, the beam has, let's look at the detail here. Beam has, in the right and the left direction, has different kinematics or deformation that induces this finite sweeping area. And bigger this area, you can pump more fluid. So that's an optimization of the design for single cilium. And here, Reynolds number is very small. That means everything is so viscous. That's why everything needs to be non-reciprocal to create propulsion or fluidic pumping. Then we make array of these beams with specific programming. So they are collectively programmed to create this metacoronal wave. And now, because of that coordination, these beams, cilia, can efficiently, like biological ones, pump the fluids, which could be very viscous. And besides fluids, also we can have foreign objects. In this case, you see, like our mucus could be an example. We can pump them very efficiently, and these are real-time speeds that can happen in very viscous environments. So that's very exciting for us to create such bio-inspired new cilia arrays. Finally, before I finish, I want to show you now more even functional devices using these soft actuators rather than just bio-inspired locomotion systems. So a recent work, again, not published, is we are now using multi-materials and now make more complex 3D geometries of soft devices with magnetic elements. Here you see indeed a metamaterial design with different colors means different materials. We design them in a way that when they apply remote magnetic fields, that they deform. And because of the design, if you don't apply an actuation, it can have an elastic energy stored that will clamp the device, so it will anchor it in a tubular region. But if you apply a magnetic field from outside, this device will contract, and that way we can move it. So here, what you should be very careful is this device can anchor while there is a flow, which is like a blood flow on the order of tens of centimeters per second, like our blood. In that sense, we can make medical anchoring devices to deliver drugs or do sensor measurements inside the body for long durations in a stable way while there is high flow in the environment. Another new medical device is a wireless peristaltic pump that we created for the first time at the mini scale. So this peristaltic pump has a special body undulation, which is now not two-dimensional, but it's three-dimensional, that can use a traveling wave to pump a liquid droplet, or we can also, let's go to the other mode, that it can also have solid objects move. So if we go higher speed, so we can put into the same pump, as you see this mini scale, that if you put in a solid object, like our food, our intestines have these traveling waves, or GI tract, all the GI tract in our body has these peristaltic waves to move fluids and solids in a controlled way. So we can mimic such thing and create synthetic peristaltic pumps that are fully wireless that can be used for medical applications. Final example is this soft capsule, which is a 0.5 millimeter size. So it's this smallest ever device at the scale that we can put inside drugs or other specific cargo. And we can control their shape deformation in a target location. They can do rolling on the surface. This is stomach phantom. And by controlled magnetic field, we can eject the drug in a controlled way in the right target. So we can also have the same function with many of them at the same time, rather than one capsule. You see 5 of them here on a stomach model. We can roll them from by remote magnetic actuation. And when we compress them in a controlled way, again, using external magnetic fields, they can eject the drug in a controlled way in the right target location. So these things are becoming possible. That is exciting for many doctors, but we are still working on clinical applications. So these are first concept results. I think I will skip this one, but maybe I can just say that briefly. We can also make reprogrammable soft actuators, magnetic actuators, by using magnetic particles that we can do local heating, like laser heating. And when we heat them, they can go above their Curie temperature. That means they demagnetize. Then by applied remote field, we can locally program their magnetic properties, and we can reprogram it every time. So these are special magnetic particles. And when we do that, the nice thing is that this is an example. We can make metamaterials from these magnetic actuators for the first time. That first, with the given magnetic properties, it can have this metamaterial behavior by applied fields from outside, left and right, in the middle scale. And then with a laser system, we can go and reprogram the magnetic properties so that the reprogrammed part can have now different deformation than the previous one. So that means we can reprogram the shape and behavior of the metamaterial. So now there's another mode that, as you see, we can now change programming by reprogramming it in a different way. So these are all possible things. At the very last example, we can even make these soft actuators at the micron scale, which is a big development for our group. That we are excited that, again, we cannot tell all details, but these are now cell-size soft machine that has magnetic elements inside that we can, in 3D, control their morphology and the motion and shape programming to create many interesting behavior for manipulation and locomotion. I think it's time to conclude. So I try to show you soft-bodied magnetic robots as examples of physical intelligence systems by their shape programming and even reprogramming and shape adaptation. They can be multifunctional, they can do multi-locomotion, and they can work in different environments. As the next works, we are trying to integrate sensing and learning behavior and more functions, and also more advanced biocompatible and degradable materials for medical applications. And now also adding medical imaging and more detailed clinical applications to show them in real preclinical demonstrations. So this is my team, which consists of many diverse background people in engineering, material science, and other fields to enable such complicated and multidisciplinary research. Thanks for your attention.
Great, thank you, Metin. That was a really spectacular talk. I very much enjoyed it, and it's sort of a wonderful combination of biology in terms of inspiration, mechanics in terms of the fundamental, operation of these devices, and a strong materials component as well. And so I want to thank you for serving as an Extreme Mechanics Letters webinar speaker. And I want to also highlight to the audience that you're also involved with the journal as an editor. And so speaking from the standpoint of all of the editors, I think the journal is very interested in publishing this type of work. And so if you're a participant, you're listening to this talk, you're involved in this area, keep Extreme Mechanics Letters in mind as a journal destination for your latest manuscripts. So I think at this point we enter the question and answer period. And so maybe I'll start off and ask a question myself, and then we'll hand it off to those in the audience who have questions of their own. So my question has to do with sensing and learning. So you had this beautiful front end on your talk, couching things in biological context, and I think you've made incredible progress around biologically inspired modes of locomotion. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are around, adding sensing functionality to these platforms. And maybe there are a lot of things you could think about there, but learning as well. And I was thinking, if you have a vision system and you have full real-time programmable control of these magnetic fields, to what extent could you form an arbitrary structure and then in a process of machine learning, define, a program sequence of magnetic fields to accomplish a certain task? I think, people have done that kind of thing in the virtual realm, little structures that learn how to walk over time. I just wonder if that's something you've thought about, or if that's interesting. I mean, your physics-based approach is much more deterministic and sort of grounded in engineering principles, but I wonder to what extent you could throw all that out and just let a machine learning routine figure it out itself, and maybe even identify more efficient modes of locomotion in terms of speed or energy efficiency or other things. So those two things, sensing and learning.
They are great questions. And of course, by the way, I only showed maybe 1/5 of our work, that many things are also ongoing that I couldn't show all of them. But so sensing as the first point. So we have two main approaches for sensing integration. So the first one is stimuli responsive sensing of environment. So for example, if we made magnetic soft robots that are made out of gelatin, and gelatin, when it interacts with a special enzyme, like MMP2 enzyme in the body, it swells and then it changes shape. And then also it can eventually degrade. So basically, by using stimuli responsive materials, and if you can measure that shape change or color change or any physical change remotely, that could be one way of sensing environment. So that's currently we are working on with different approaches. So liquid crystals can do some sensory functions. Many smart materials have sensory functions, biomaterials also. And also our bacterial sensors themselves, right? So they sense chemical gradients, they sense temperature gradients. So we use bacteria also as sensors that we control them from remote ways. So in that sense, onboard sensing can be done with stimuli responsive materials or biological cells. And then the second way is doing fully remote sensing. So as you say, if you have an medical imaging modality that could already monitor the robot, and when the robot interacts with the environment, that can, from shape deformation or from other smart materials that can again give some other physical signal. Let's say if you are using a PET or MRI or other imaging modality, we can extract some interaction information from the environment, and that will be fully done remotely imaging it. So that's the second way of doing everything remotely from outside. So then coming to your second point, of course, learning is really essential here, and we have already many activities going on that, as you mentioned, really these are highly complex dynamic systems. Our models are only for prediction to design them in a conscious way rather than trial and error. However, their precise dynamics is so complex and so stochastic. I mean, even you fabricate the same robot, you can never guarantee that they will have the same exact dynamics. So that's why what we are developing now is we have data-driven machine learning approaches that after you make some very complex robots, as you mentioned, even we are missing maybe some locomotion modalities that the same robot can do that we didn't know. So that's why exploration and discovering such modalities, right now we are using data-driven machine learning methods that we give random inputs in a long duration and play with the dynamics of the robot and discover all these different modalities, different dynamics, and learn at the end that when you want to have a specific function, you can have an optimal specific mode that will give you the best behavior. So that's more what we call offline learning to design the right robot for right function. The second learning is more real-time learning, that when you put them in the body and when you have some feedback modality with imaging, then you also need to be adaptive and learning that how to work in a complex environment. Also, we like to have much faster algorithms that can measure the robot behavior and can adapt and give right inputs, because as you say, magnetic actuation is very precise, very fast. As long as you have imaging modality relatively fast, good enough, then we can really learn how to behave in a complex environment so that we can be safe and also achieve the function. So that's why we're also trying to use learning techniques right now to control in the feedback loop the function of the robot in a complex environment in the real time also.
Fantastic. Yeah, really fascinating stuff. So I think I'm going to shut up and let others ask their questions. So do we have anybody who has a question? Maybe we can go to Jenny, maybe.
Metin, wonderful talk. And I'm particularly interested in your, earlier in your talk, you talk about physical intelligence. In other words, there's no brain to control these things. It's controlled by different ways. And I'm also thinking about, in your case, for example, your magnetic system. Maybe there are potential opportunities to have coupled systems. Let me give you an example. You have a system that you can reprogramming by changing pH. Locally, the chemical interaction between your robots and the pH change will change the mechanical property of the material locally. And that would change the shape change and the control of the robots. Have you made, I'm sure you've thought about these things, but I just want to hear your, whether you have tried these things and you have such great resources at Max Planck, maybe these are the type of things that you can explore.
Yeah, that's a great point that, as you say, we can use the external stimulus in the environment. As you mentioned, this could be pH in the given local environment, or oxygen, or also morphological changes like constraints in the environment. So they can be induced as a way of feedback to create some adaptation. But as you mentioned here, the idea is to use smart materials. As in the case of, for example, biomaterial like the squid ring teeth, I showed that protein, when it encounters with any pH different environment, it will have different swelling behavior. And that could be used as an adaptation because let's say you want to now change your, let's say, locomotion behavior. You want to escape from it or you want to go towards it. And then depends on your objective, that stimulus can change the mechanical deformation of your body that can change your magnetic actuation modality that will behave you in an autonomous way without any precise control from outside, that it will self-adapt to the environmental changes. So we are looking at those type of behavior right now with different stimuli responsive, pH responsive, or also chemical responsive materials. Even as you mentioned, one interesting other thing we could do also is, besides sensing, can we use these interactions to chemically communicate? Because right now at this length scale in the robotics, there is no way that tiny robots can communicate. So we might also actively or passively, rather than sensing only, we could also release, like the quorum sensing, bacteria release these molecules to the environment that is detected by the others to communicate. So in that sense, we are also looking at not only sensing, but also communication techniques slowly to use different chemicals basically ejected from outside of the robot and detected by the others that induce a response, so that they can have a coordinated collective behavior by sensing or communicating environment, and sensing and communicating in the environment. But these are ideas that are not done, but we are working towards those goals.
Wonderful, fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Jimmy. So Sulin, I think you have your hand up, so go ahead.
Hey, Metin, wonderful talk. I very much enjoyed it. So my question goes to the actuation. You embed magnetic dipoles in your soft machine or soft robotics, and then you use a external magnetic field to actuate the robot. But we know in biological cells, inside the cell we have a lot of motors, motor proteins, mice motors to drive the cells. Have you ever think of embed such kind of motors inside your soft robotics so that you can actuate it without any external applied fields?
Sure. I mean, that's a great point. Indeed, the first example of such idea was from Cornell in 2001, that they, the group's name, I forget now, but they basically took the biomotor of FATPase. And as you say, they engineered in a way that they stick a synthetic road, nanorode. And when you give ATP, you can create rotary motion like bacteria flagellum, right? So as you say, that's a great point of extracting biological motors, which are proteins, from biological cells like bacteria, and then integrating them into the robots would be a great way of actuation. So in my personal history, I looked at that in the past, but that needs, at that time especially, it needs a lot of chemistry knowledge, and assembling those systems is highly complex. And when you look at those assembly systems, it's self-assembly techniques. They are not deterministic techniques, and the yield is very low. So out of maybe thousands, few of them work great. But again, these are definitely possible approaches, but assembling those machines, getting them together is definitely non-trivial. However, then if you look at our approach, we said, like, rather than biomotor extraction, why don't we take the whole cell itself as an actuator? Because also when you take the biomotor only, then you forget about all the sensory feedback, control, capabilities of the bacterium in the cell membrane, inside the cell membrane. And also don't forget, you always need ATP for biomotors. So getting ATP to those motors could not be practical. That's why they are mostly great science projects. But if you want to do engineering with biomotors directly, really you need to engineer them in a way that you need to have constant ATP source to drive them. So that was another practical problem that we tried to go away from direct usage of biomotors. So then we said, rather than just taking the biomotor, let's take the whole organism and engineer it, because bacteria are very well understood and we can engineer them. And then we can use their sensory functions and other behavior as long as we can control it precisely from outside. That way we take not the biomotor, but we take the whole biocell at the current approach of biohybrid. But definitely your point is well taken, and people have shown with cardiomyocytes, and we also did in our group some work with cardiomyocytes and other type of active cells, which are biomotors, to create active machines. As long as you can assemble them, as long as you can power them with ATP, then they are great also systems for active control, especially at the nanoscale and very, very small scale. That will be, I think, the most promising technique in the future for nano machines. But for micro millisystems, I think cells or other solutions right now look more promising in the sense of especially practical usage at the end.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you.
Very good. Gian, do you have a question? I see that you're unmuted.
Okay, yeah, Prof. Sitti, yeah, very beautiful and inspiring work. I have two questions. The first question is, compared to traditional hard material-based robot and also large scale robot. What's the challenging issue of soft and microscale robot? This is the first question. Second question is, what are potential applications for these soft microscale robots? Thank you.
Thank you. So for your first question, so as you say, like rigid robots are well established, and when you go soft, the challenges are, of course, first material science. So to make a soft robot really functionally working properly as you want, you need to know a lot of material science to choose the right soft materials, stimuli responsive materials, program their shape with different inputs, different stimuli. So in that sense, as you see, there are a lot of recent studies in soft robotics, which is a hot field. There are a lot of new methods of actuation, sensing, and other aspects. So in that sense, there's a lot of development needed in the material still. And also, as the questions were very nicely asked, not only actuating, but also sensing with soft materials and doing control and communication. These are things that there are a lot of developments need to be made and people are making in the literature. So in that sense, one big challenge in soft systems is powering. So if it's magnetic, the trick we do remote actuation, you don't need power source on the robot. But if you need to do full soft system with no external actuation, then your power source should be soft and many things should be soft. That's why you need to use really new powering techniques than rigid systems. That is also very challenging. And finally, we shouldn't also forget that fully soft systems are not necessarily always the best solution for a given engineering problem. Because the problem of soft systems, while they are very advantageous for shape control and many functionality behavior, they are very weak in the sense of applied force to the environment. Is that right? So let's say if you want to make a biopsy robot, or if you want to have a robot that needs to sustain against very strong forces, then your robot needs to become rigid. That's why the future will be in not only rigid robots, not fully soft robots. Future will be in soft and rigid together, hybrid robots like ourselves, right? So our body is integration of rigid skeleton with soft tissue. That is definitely the most adaptive, especially at the large scale, so that our gravity will not squish us. If you are fully soft, we cannot be soft because otherwise we can never have mechanical integrity. So in that sense, for mechanical integrity, for applying higher force to the environment, we need to combine soft robot systems with rigid together. Coming to your second question of potential applications of soft robots, in the literature, there are many things going on, but I could say that to me, the killer application will be medical device applications. In our group, for the first time, we showed the first soft medical device, maybe now 8-9 years ago, that a capsule that can change the deformation for doing some other functions like biopsy and other things. So these devices really can enable safe, but also very programmable, complex operations that medical devices cannot. In that sense, the medical use is one of the biggest ones. And the second one is more human-robot interaction. So if you make big robots that need to interact with humans, then robotics has a lot of applications.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good. So Jingda, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Oh, sorry. So
let's go to Jingda first, and then Jin Huang.
Okay. So Professor Sitti, I really enjoy your talk. So I have two questions. The first one is, I noticed that the working space for the robot for the magnetic field is very small. So when you apply these Microsoft robots in body, how do you operate this? The second question is, so have you ever tried magnetic hydrogels? Because hydrogels are more biocompatible than elastomers. So do you have any comment on this? So thank you.
Okay, thanks for the two great questions. In the sense of magnetic actuation workspace, human scale is no problem. For example, MRI is a magnetic actuation or magnetic imaging system that definitely can, in the sense of human diameter or size scale, we can these days make magnetic both actuation and also imaging systems. So as long as you stay within our human body's length scale, it's possible. Of course, when you go bigger workspace, then the complication will be you will need bigger coils, more currents, because then you want to cover a large range with the given input magnetic fields and gradients. So then you need like cooling systems, so that when you look at MRI, why it's so expensive is because of it has very complex cooling system, because it goes really, really high currents to generate 7 Tesla. Of course, in our case, we design our robots and actuators to really require very small magnetic fields. So that's why they are possible with even relatively conventional coil systems. So in that sense, I could say human size scale electromagnetic actuators is no problem. Even these days, people are talking about rooms that you can do electromagnetic power transfer. So even in the room size, you can do some things. Of course, those are low power applications. But if you want to do actuation, then I could say table size scale, human size scale is possible with more larger electromagnetic systems. Coming to your second point, definitely magnetic hydrogels are great ideas. I mentioned the example of gelatin. As you know, gelatin is also biological hydrogel in some sense. And then definitely we are looking at different hydrogels that Xuan Hayes and many other people are expert in hydrogel, and we are looking at from different perspectives too. As you say, they are biocompatible, but magnetic hydrogel has the same problem that still magnetic particles, if they are not, let's say, biocompatible, even your hydrogel biocompatible doesn't save us. So that's why definitely look at hydrogels, but it only solves part of the problem. Still, magnetic part is there. In that regard, I didn't show, but we have already, we have found specific ferromagnetic materials that are highly biocompatible if you synthesize them correctly. So in that sense, you know, to us, the most challenging thing is not the polymer matrix being biocompatible or biodegradable. It's more the magnetic material being biocompatible and biodegradable, and at the same time, very strong magnetic properties, of course, is preferred. But that's a good point, that hydrogels are definitely interesting, and we are looking at some different hydrogel systems.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Okay, lots of great questions. Jinhua, you want to ask yours?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor Sitti. I really enjoy your wonderful talk. My question is, so I'm very interested in the medical micro robots. So my medical robots are designed for medical use. My question is, when these medical micro robots enter into our human bodies, the mononuclear phagocyte system, such as macrophages, neutrophils, or dendritic cells, may clear them from our body. So how to design medical micro robots that can invade this immune system, such as phagocytosis?
Exactly, great question.
You.
We have just a paper coming in June in Science Robotics that I highly recommend to read.
I noticed that,
We looked at basically, as you say, it's a very important point that mini or microscale, especially microscale, as you say, any device, synthetic or biohybrid, doesn't matter. It gets inside the body. For the body, they are foreign objects, right? So then, as you say, our immune cells will have a response. So that is macrophages and many other leukocytes and many other systems will basically attack and try to digest or get rid of them. So then you need to make, so there are challenging issues here. One is how to make a micro robot that is let me call it non-immunogenic, so that they cannot be easily got rid of from the immune system. On the other hand, still being safe, because don't forget, when you are very stealthy from immune system, like our viruses, these viruses like we have right now at the moment, then it's a big problem because the immune system cannot detect them, and then they can become very dangerous for our health. Is right? So in that sense, we are looking for solutions where we want to hide from the immune system for some duration, but at the end, we want to make sure that immune system can still clear them up at the end, after the operation is over. So that's why it's even a higher challenging problem than just making them stealthy. We need to be eventually getting rid of them. And in this as a solution, so there are multiple solutions we are looking at. One is we are trying to use patient-specific cells as the robot component. As I showed the example of red blood cell, and we have now other robots that I don't have time to show, that we are taking the biological material from the body, relatively easy ones, and then we can turn them into the robot component. So then the immune system knows that it's its body's own cell, so they will never attack it, is all right? So that's one, what they call autologous solution that will make life easy. But the second is, let's say, even, let's say if you cannot use the body's own material of the patient, then you need to really choose the right material on the robot. So for example, we have another new work that is under review. We use Zevitronic materials. Zevitronic materials are highly promising polymers that are fully biocompatible. Even better than PEG. As you know, PEG is right now standard in biocompatible polymers in our body, hydrogels. But we showed that PEGs are really not working. And many people show that PEGs are really, by time, has immunoresponse, and eventually they are not fully biocompatible. They're okay for my contact lens, but inside the body, they are not okay. So that's why we are looking for new non-immunogenic polymers like Zevitronic materials that we can 3D print and make micro robots. So in that sense, yeah, there is a lot of active research going on material science aspect of biocompatible materials that immune system will not react negatively or will detect only after long durations. So yeah, and the other point is, besides material, the size and the shape of the robot we showed in recent work that is highly important for immune system reaction. So we showed that if you have a helical robot, depends on the number of helices you have, macrophages respond differently. So that's why you need to really understand both morphological and surface material properties of your robot well, that immune cells will not capture them and enclose them immediately. But that's a great point. It's a big area of research. And we have the first systematic study in the literature that will be published soon. That is only one first piece of the big puzzle that we show macrophage interaction with these different morphological robots, shapes, and also materials. But I would say that for any design, other designs, you need to look at, and especially soft robots, nobody knows. Because soft robot interaction with macrophages will be even more complicated. But I think the good news is soft robots will have easier response or easier to escape from macrophages than rigid robots. I can tell you that as an initial information. But yeah, I think with many aspects of morphology, shape, material, and size scale optimization will be needed for minimizing immune cell reaction, while at the end, we want to make sure that we get rid of them with no side effects. That's a great point.
Yeah,
really great ideas. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, interesting set of topics. I think we can go to Xuan He now.
Hey, Martin.
Hello.
Great to see you. Wonderful talk. I truly enjoyed. So you discussed lots of new results, even just since January from the Gordon Conference. Great talk. Now, I want to follow John's questions on sensing and control. I want to ask more specifically in the context of imaging, right? Translation roadmap. So in terms of imaging, do you think, currently this fluoroscope for medical application, this fluoroscope imaging will become eventually the dominant one, dominate over other, imaging system will focus on that one, or, some onboard sensing imaging or other, ultrasound, those will also play a key role. So that's number one. I want to see your insight. Number two is translation roadmap. Yeah, you guys already demonstrated, beautiful, devices with a potential biomedical applications. Do you see, a roadmap, in how long we'll see this, truly making an impact in, biomedical area? What can be the roadmap for this field? So,
sure. Yeah, great two questions. By the way, Xuan has many great works also in this field that I don't have time to go over.
I follow you.
As you mentioned, the medical imaging modalities are highly important for both tracking the devices and also controlling devices. So in that regard, as you mentioned, fluoroscopy is coming as an interesting one, but our big issue with fluoroscopy is it's only, again, a PET system for animals, but when you go into humans, except very special situations that if you can really lower the dosage a lot, maybe you might be really use it clinically, but because of radiation problems, doctors, because now one good thing I did in the last few years is I'm now a medical school professor in Turkey, that I really talk with the doctors to get their opinion, like, look, is this a good idea? They said, no. Fluoroscopy is great for urgency and some special cases, but they try to avoid it and they try to use it as little as possible. The ultrasound is highly practical as long as you have mini-scale devices, all right? So ultrasound is very hard to get work with much small ones, although it's promising that ultrasound can get also 100 micron scale device imaging. However, you need to then get close to the surface, like work range gets smaller. So our right now current bets are, one is MRI. MRI, all this expensive. In our lab, we have one, just acquired recently. MRI has the big workspace, is very biocompatible because there is no radiation going on. And since our robots are already magnetic, they are amazing. They are so easy to see inside MRI. Even micron scale ones, we can see those macrophages I showed with the magnetic material inside, we can see under MRI. So of course we are still working on these, but then the problem is of course an expensive system. But as long as you can convert a real MRI into a robotic MRI that you just change the software and in the hospitals they can use it, I think it can become translational. But otherwise, of course, not every lab can have an MRI access to do those things. Other aspect I can say in ultrasound is photoacoustic imaging is becoming a very big potential imaging modality that we are just acquiring a system that will come next year. So photoacoustic imaging has, as you know, light input for stimulation and then acoustic sensing. Then they can go 5 centimeter or so, not too deep, but around 5 centimeter deep. But they can image really micron scale devices in real time and in 3D. So those are modalities we are all looking, but the short answer is there is no established technique if you are not mini-scale. Mini-scale ultrasound is working well. Fluoroscopy would work well if you lower the dosage. And then I think going smaller, you need to get into MRI or photoacoustic imaging. That's what we are currently looking at. And of course, depends on also how deep in the body you want to image. And typically microrobots, the advantage is being deep in the body. And if you just do surface imaging, honestly, you can do that with injections and many other techniques that in most applications, we need to go deeper and deeper in the body with wireless robots. So yeah, I mean, if you have follow-up question on imaging, please let me know. Because in imaging, I mean, resolution is one thing, speed is other thing, 3D, 2D is other thing, radiation and all the safety issues are other. I mean, there are a lot of parameters we need to optimize for clinical use. In the sense of translation roadmap and duration and all the steps, as you say, most of the time in the literature, to be honest, most of the studies we have proof of concept devices that still need a lot of work to get into first preclinical stage of approval and animal testing, and then clinical stage of human usage. Because all of these devices and materials we're talking are highly new, especially wireless ones, but you have also great catheter example, which is active magnetic actuation one. I would say mini-scale devices will get into clinic much earlier, not the micro-scale ones. That's why in this field, we should push hard on, but the range is though very sweet range. So if you're bigger than 1 centimeter, it doesn't make sense. So you need to be really from 100 micron to 1 centimeter range. In that mesoscale, we will have the highest impact near-term medical devices coming up. Then we can talk about, I mean, any new technology in the body, you talk about, I mean, 10 years to get into clinics. But in the lab, I think within 5 years, we will show in the animals successful results. And then clinic, again, will possible. And some millimeter scale ones with the micro scale devices, that is more long-term. But you never know. With the biohybrid approach, with the macrophage approach, we are very optimistic. We will now do in vivo experiments in small animals this year in collaboration with medical doctors. And if those results are positive, that can get into human testing in also 5 years or so. We believe because we are taking really patients' own cells, and what we are doing is not drastically crazy enough that doctors can take it and FDA can approve it eventually. So in that sense, really biohybrid approach is other second one will get into clinic if there are right biological elements are used with the least danger to the body. So yeah, I mean, we will see. Hopefully before I retire, I will see something at least in some patients. So that's my dream right now. But yeah, we're working hard on it. But as you say, it's not an easy roadmap with a lot of scientific and practical challenges.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thanks.
All right, great. Xiaoyue, you want to ask a question?
Hi, Professor Sitti. Thank you so much for the very astonishing talk. It's very inspiring. And right now I'm a postdoc working with Professor John Rogers, actually, at Northwestern. So I share with Professor Xia that I'm super interested in the physical intelligence that you are trying to learn for your programmable systems. But I'm wondering, like, since like you're actually learning right now from the physical intelligence like existed in the nature, but is there any chance that we can actually feed back some of the learned, for example, many-body interaction systems and try to understand better how this like complex system is evolving, because you have the ability to actually program the building block and also program the interactions and also program the shape and everything. And so, for example, when you learn things and you probably have failures and success, and so how do you vision these type of things? And have you ever been succeeded in any of these aspects of study?
Okay, that's a great follow-up question. As you mentioned, in the sense of physical intelligence, learning by time, different things is very new, and maybe some chemists did some experiments in the past that are relevant, but it's not really systematically studied. So one thing I haven't mentioned in my talk that we are working intensely is we are looking at multi-body collective systems that I don't have time to show them. So when we talk about these magnetic micro robots, especially, and even mini ones, we are making them in large numbers, and we not only design them individually. Like I showed in the cilia is a static example of it. So cilia, if you look at it, rather than they have a special coupling. That coupling induced the metacoronal wave. Right phase difference. And with the right phase difference, you get the most collective pooling of the fluid that gives you the best result, which is kind of in biology systems, you can learn it and basically tune it to find the optimal basically thing. But there, the cilia are static to the surface, so they are more just bending. So those cases will be easier to do. So for example, as I mentioned, machine learning techniques, we can go ahead and try to integrate learning by observing and then eventually find the right inputs to the system to get the optimal behavior. However, self-learning is very beyond challenge, because there you need to hold everything autonomously within the material. Let's assume that you want to do it fully autonomously without external interruption. There is no good idea or clear idea, except we are working on this collective multi-body systems where their interactions by time, even if they have any changes in the system, they can self-adapt by self-organization. That's one thing we have been doing. And even there, we still give external energy all the time, but they self-organize into patterns themselves using different interactions like magnetic, surface tension, and other interactions. So in that sense, I think multi-body collective systems is one way to create physical intelligence by coupling the interactions. So there, it's all about physical coupling. But for single systems, then you need to be able to do it in the single body of the robot or device. That is, to me, more challenging. That's why you look at nature, that multi-body systems typically are much intelligent when they collectively interact. So individual single organisms or robots will be, whatever we do, will be always limited at the end. That's why we are really looking at collective behavior, because even in the real applications, as we are talking about medical applications, when you want to give drug delivery, you cannot have only a few robots. You need to have thousands or millions of these tiny robots. So then you need to collectively control them, both interaction-wise, also remote control-wise. So we are looking at those problems, and we are looking at self-assembling systems that can self-create patterns. But what we do is only we remotely just change the interaction, but the rest is autonomously done by the material itself and the interaction itself. So that's, I think, a great open area of research under the physical intelligence umbrella. That, again, we have some initial studies that we are publishing in that regard, but there is still a long way to go.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Bahar, looks like you have a question. You want to go ahead?
Hello.
Hello.
Wonderful talk. Thank you so much. I was thinking, it seems like for the design of soft, small magnetic robots, there seems to be a lot of different options for the soft material, ranging from elastomers to biomaterial. So do you think in the future, the range of available magnetic materials would be actually posing more limitations on the possible designs? And if so, what do you think will be these limitations?
Yeah, that's a great question. As you mentioned, and I mentioned a little bit, is in the sense of soft material, we have a broad range of options, as also questions from hydrogels to biopolymers or biomaterials to elastomers and many other synthetic or biological materials. As you say, the limitation will come from the magnetic material options. If you look at literature, most of the current works use natrium iron boron type of strong but toxic materials that are not really viable in medical applications most of the time, or in some specific applications they are viable. That's why currently in our group, we are looking at all different magnetic material options. There are good thing is there are definitely options. Even there are chemicals that are magnetic. So there are even polymers themselves magnetic rather than particles being magnetic. So in that sense, we are looking from magnetic polymers themselves chemically, because chemicals with radicals, they can be magnetic, but they are weak, of course. And then we look at synthetic particles or nanomaterials that are made out of alloys. So iron, platinum, and nickel, iron. There are many options that they can be biocompatible. And then, of course, the most widely used one is iron oxide. I didn't mention iron oxide is a soft magnetic material. As you know, Spion is the most popular commercial material, which is biocompatible and biodegradable. That we are also eventually, of course, using it. The big problem of all these materials is they have all strengths and weaknesses. So iron oxide is great for biocompatibility, but it's weak, it's soft magnetic, it cannot keep its magnetic property when you turn off the field. So that's why we need to have a library of many magnetic and non-magnetic materials that depends on the application of, if your priority is about biodegradability and biocompatibility, you have a limited option of magnetic materials. But if you don't care, then you have a big library. So that's why we are creating that library with different options. But I could say that there will be no one magnetic material that will be solving all of those problems. So again, they solve some part of the problem, then they are so weak that they are not useful for some other problems. So that's why the idea is to create, like in the polymers science, create a range of materials that depends on the application. Someone needs to choose the optimal one for their use.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob.
Question. Freak, would you like to ask a question?
Me? Right. May I?
Sure. From
Okay.
TU Delft, you want to go? Let's go to
Oh,
TU
yeah.
Delft, and then we'll come back to Li Qin.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so here, thank you very much for giving us a nice talk. So here I just have a very simple question. It's about the structure you are using in the model at the end of your talk. So, you show the structure is like a letter. When you give the tension loading, then another side also get tension. So it's kind of a negative Pearson's ratio effect. So if we compare your model to the model in the last week, so actually in her talk, she used the triangle structure. So if we compare her structure to your structure, then I don't know what's the advantage or disadvantage from both of your models. Why you didn't use her model, or maybe your model is better than her model in your structure? Yeah, I just wonder. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. I assume you're talking about Katya's talk last week. I mean, Katya is expert in materials, and we have just started working on materials recently in our group. As you say, there is a big design space in metamaterials, which are basically using structures, as the design variable to create very unique properties that doesn't exist in nature. So in that sense, you're definitely right that we can try other materials which might have even better performance. The idea of that proof of concept demonstration was just to show that we can use our magnetic material concept, which can be reprogrammed, to reprogram any material that you design. So the idea there was not to show an optimized material, but more show that having any material design, this could be any of them, triangular or other designs that are very unique or very interesting, but we can go there as long as we can design a magnetically actuatable with our materials, which is typically possible. We are working on those details now. Then we can reprogram them and we can actuate them magnetically. So in that sense, magnetic materials will be a big field in the near future, which we are working on. Again, currently we haven't pushed the complexity and optimality of materials. We just showed that, look, if you have a design, you can now magnetically actuate them first, and second, we can reprogram, because there are people in material field looking at mechanical memory. For example, in some of these patterns, they try to create wave propagation, like Katya showed, that can also eventually induce some elastic stored energy that can be used like a memory. So in those designs, they're all fixed. So whatever you program, they can only make a material that has a fixed property. What we bring with the magnetic active materials, and especially the ones with reprogramming, you can reprogram and change those functions in the same structure without building a new one. You see what I mean? So we try to increase the design space of materials with these new active magnetic materials that will create more complex actuations, but also reprogramming capabilities. So in that sense, you're right that we haven't optimized the material, but the focus there was more on the capabilities of reprogramming and magnetic actuation. But definitely, I talked with Katya, we are trying to collaborate, so, and I'll get some new postdocs in that field from who work with her, who will optimize and push more complex material designs that can take advantage of our new materials and new actuation techniques. But that's a very good point.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Great. Okay, we'll go to Freak now. You're on.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. I was mainly interested in the idea of physical intelligence. If you look at those amoeba and those examples you showed, it seems like there are multiple parts working together to create the complex behavior we see. So how do you, what are your ideas on combining different materials or different structures which all respond to local stimuli to create complex behavior on either a material or a robot overall?
Yeah, I think thanks for the question. This is relevant to also previous question about using multi-body interactions for physical intelligence. As you say in the amoeba, the behavior happens because within the cell membrane there are these distributed actuators. You can call them agents or whatever you can call them, that behave in distributed way, not centralized, but distributed way, that they can collectively interact and self-organize into patterns by the stimuli of the local chemical sensing. So that's why the future, in the sense of, I think also this is related to a great question about learning and other more advanced complex behavior. The future will be in a soft body, you need many of these self-organizing multi-agents components that will change their self-organization with the input from the environment so that they can self-adapt and create an active directional behavior that will turn into some locomotion and then eventually grabbing the plant cell, that kind of more advanced functionality. So that's why right now we are at the very basic level of one body, how to make it intelligent. But really, if you look at those biological ones, their complexity comes from, because also they are within that given on a microscale amoeba, there are many much smaller agents actively coordinating through some stimuli. So that's the complexity we need to go in the next levels to create such intelligent behavior.
So does that also mean that to create that complex behavior, that you need this change in connectivity between the different agents? So you need those mobile agents and can't have a fixed connectivity between the different parts?
Definitely, because again, here, since we are talking about all physical chemical interactions creating the self-organized X behavior, that's why you need to make, even in the advanced versions, like for example, in self-healing robots, self-healing materials that I haven't shown, we make them in a way that when anything happens locally, it breaks, then that area self-responds and then repair that area locally. So that's, for for example, a localized distributed behavior, so that you need to really distribute within one body all these, let's say, active and sensory and also eventually adapting, self-adapting things in a coupled way, so that otherwise they will be not one bodies, right? So otherwise they will be swarms of robots or animals that are working, which is another interesting area. But within the one body also, you can eventually make collective systems that can create much complex and advanced behavior. That's what really happens in biology, which also needs to happen in synthetic systems if you want to get similar complexities at that length scale. But that's a great point. Yeah, we're working on it, but long way to go. Thank you.
All right, Jigen, you're up.
Oh, Metin, spectacular talk, unbelievable, unbelievable. So specific question, I want to have a good example from your large collection of demos at this point. I know it's a long way from a practical application. If we think about ancient or old successful examples, heart valve, it serves a particular thing. It uses our people's own blood to actuate, or guide wires, right? It's a mechanical actuation. You can think that way. So all these specific examples are solving specific problems. Can you point out one particular application you're thinking about? It's quite close to use these soft magnetic things, can do something useful.
Okay, let's get into details. All right, good. So I can tell you one specific example. We are working on some clogging application in the fallopian tube, where for birth control right now, what they do is they go with a tool that they even took out from the I think they took it back, but so basically you can go and block it so that you don't have any baby anymore. But it's a permanent surgery or permanent, closure. If you change your mind one day, you cannot have a baby anymore. So we are right now building a soft device that goes there, close the tube by remote control. It's a wireless device. And then after, let's say, keep there for years, assuming with the right materials. And then when you want to have baby, we can take it out again. So it can move out. So soft devices are great for clogging any complex environment because also since it's soft, it doesn't create a tissue reaction. The current device, why there were some complications, some women died, is they put a rigid device that the tissue scar there can induce immune reaction that can create really toxic effect. So in that sense, soft devices, one big advantage in medical application is since they match to the body's softness, then the reaction, and this is a mechanical stress, is much reduced significantly. That way, we believe for these implantable soft devices will have a big advantage in the case of birth control as one example. But other than that, big thing is right now we are pushing is, for example, in the GI tract, we want to do fluid biopsy. For example, in microbiome research right now, the big issue is within your intestines, they need to collect a bacteria species in specific part of your intestine so that they can understand if you have any sickness and also understand what's happening. So we are building now soft capsules that can go into the right intestinal region and then collect a fluid sample and then take it out and do analysis of that microbiome of the bacteria there. So that's another practical one I can say that will be a simple idea, but will be very useful. So I think the great thing about your question is the best applications will come from the simple, effective device that solves a genuine need that they cannot do right now. So that's always the big problems, right? So, that heart wall thing, if they had another solution, they wouldn't do it. So even you have a cool soft device that can do cool things, doesn't mean that doctors would accept it because they might solve those problems, or when you think that's a problem for you, for them, indeed, they don't care sometimes. That's why working closely with doctors, I think Sean had mentioned that greatly last time when he presented, really understanding where they have major problems of finding solution. So for example, in brain, we are getting the brain applications where they have a lot of problems of accessing for anti-clogging of the brain, stroke and other things. So we are identifying now where the doctors have major issues and then trying to find as simple as devices that can solve those problems.
Can I ask another question?
Sure, definitely.
Yeah, so today you focus on using magnetic field to mainly application you envision is inside body. Of course, you have such a broad range of interests. I just want to get your opinion, magnetic versus electrical. Electrical probably, in particular, dielectric elastomer, clearly not very suitable inside the body, just a huge voltage. But in broad, as a broad class of actuation, how do you think about these things? Magnetic versus electrical.
I just wrote an article on magnetic against optical. So this is interesting. Magnetics against electrical. Nobody asked yet, so you're the first one. So as you say, I think the major issue with electrical approach is in medical applications that we are targeting inside the body, as you say, because of high voltage. They are really not practical, except if you do remote power transfer, which we are looking at right now, then you can do electrical actuation. Because also electrical actuation, the big problem is you need a wire or electrical power sources, right? You need a battery or you need some electronics and this and that. So I think electrical will be promising if you combine it with, I mean, we have just one paper writing that we use RF power or optical power transfer to induce electrical current that can induce a Lorentz actuation inside MRI that can be used for device actuation and medical application. So as you say, as long as you can transmit power wirelessly, electrical actuation could be interesting. And as long as you lower your voltage requirements, that will be safe inside the body, then I think there might be a chance. Because electrical actuation, the advantage is it can be much compact, but it's also not so robust. So one problem with electrical actuation, because I work on these things so long, I work with piezos and many other things also, that any disturbance in the environment, let's say change in the conditions in the environment, can negatively affect. So that's why as long as it's short range actuation and as long as you have a controlled good environment and with a good packaging, and then electrical actuation, I see like Hazel actuators and those are coming along, indeed. But I don't see them inside the body yet. Okay, so if you can pull the voltage down significantly to tens of volts or maybe several hundreds of volts and isolate very well, I think that might be possible. What I would say is more than electrical. Current candidates we are looking at, which I didn't talk about today, is ultrasonic acoustic waves are indeed as good as magnetics that I haven't talked about. They have some limitations, but they're also great for deep body wireless actuation approaches. Optical, as I mentioned, close to the skin is okay, but electrical, I only saw, I mean, what we did is capsule robots in the body that has everything integrated with the battery, with electronics, then electrical worked so far well. But I haven't seen any other soft version I haven't seen yet. So I think that's a great question. So if you can make some ionically actuated soft actuator that requires only low voltage or that harvests the body fluids and can be wirelessly powered, that I think could be viable one day. So nobody, as far as I know, nobody's working on it.
Thank you.
But yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a good exercise to work on. Yeah.
So Metin, just to follow up Zhigang's question, have you ever have anybody think about harvesting the body temperature or body motion and convert this mechanical energy or thermal energy into, let's say, if you have piezoelectric material component in your robotics?
Yeah, I mean, that point is, John knows better. I mean, in wearable devices, that's a huge area of research that a lot of people are looking at harvesting energy from body motion and foot contact and many, many things and temperature gradients, as you mentioned. Definitely, that's an area we are currently starting to look at inside the body, because one great thing in the body is everything is flowing. So if you can use the flow as a means of harvesting energy, that would be great. Again, if you can have biocompatible materials that come inside the body that can harvest the flows, especially, is one thing. And then the temperature gradient is a little bit challenging. It's inside. Outside is definitely, but inside is not so good. But then also some other environmental, like chemicals and other things, definitely you can harvest them. One thing you could do is you can harvest bacteria energy inside the body. So, I mean, as you know, in fuel cells and other research, people are using some biological cells to create some energy source. So that, I think, might be more practical inside. But I can say right now, other thing is, if you have a device that can harvest the blood ATP or, some other smart things, that might be a very interesting way. And I think that's definitely one of the future things we will work on, because remote powering, again, is great if you are trying to make fully remotely controlled devices. But if you want to have any autonomous device for a long time, you need, it would be better to have energy harvesting system that can automatically itself powers itself and does the thing. So in that sense, I think there's a good space there, but I could say that you cannot directly use the conventional approaches. You need to adapt the concepts into more physiological environment and what are the stimuli there that you can harvest. In that sense, yeah, I think there is a good space there. For implantable sensors, people have looked some of those ideas, but I don't know anything really commercial or established yet. So, but the problem is sensors need very low power. The problem of energy harvesting, I can tell you why it is not so well accepted in robotics, is because it is only good for simple sensing and communication. Any robot actuated in the body or anywhere, the power requirement goes up 2-3 orders of magnitude. Harvested energy is too small. That's why remote powering is only way to actuate robots inside the body at the moment. But if you have smart ways of harvesting and that only needing energy for a limited time, then the energy harvesting for robots in the body will become feasible.
Yeah, I would agree with that position, Metin. I mean, I think the bottom line is biological systems are more or less efficient. There's not a lot of free energy floating around that you can just tap into and run a robot. It tends to be in the range of microwatts per square millimeter to first order, between 1 and maybe a few tens of microwatts. So, if you're running a very low power sensor, or you're operating an actuator at a very low duty cycle, and you have some kind of local storage capability, maybe, but it's hard to pull power out of the body without an adverse health consequence following that, right? So the heart, for example, is about 1 watt associated with mechanical energy of the beating of a heart. But if you try to harvest piezoelectrically more than about 10 microwatts, you induce an arrhythmia. Heart doesn't like it being mechanically loaded. So yeah, it always looks like a tantalizing possibility, but then you start looking at the engineering rigor around the magnitudes. It's tough. I think it's a frontier area, though. Probably some opportunities. New ideas probably required. So we can go to Michael now. I think, Michael, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Metin, for the interesting talk. So the composites, the robots that you showed us are in the centimeter scale, right? So they are quite big, or micron, hundreds of microns. So I was curious how sensitive in terms of mechanical deformation is your system as a function of their processing conditions, because you are using those magnetic particles at least few tens of volume %, I assume. So you are probably facing aggregation issues and things like that. So I'm wondering how sensitive is your system as a function of variations from batch to batch. And I am asking this especially because you would probably need to downscale your system if you want to apply it in the human body, say to heal a tumor locally. You would need to go to few microns or even sub-micron scale. So if you could comment on that, I would be happy. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the great question. So as you mentioned, the prototypes I showed were milliscale or 100 microscale kind of things are, or tens of microscale we are currently developing that are not published yet. So first part of your question about the sensitivity of our fabrication or the actuators with the particle variations. As you said, in the case of, I mean, in the mini scale ones, we typically make, as you say, we just mix them equally, one-to-one ratio almost in many cases. And then we don't, I mean, we assume that they're homogeneously distributed, but typically mini scale ones are not sensitive if there is some aggregation happening. But the point here is, in our cases, typically aggregation doesn't happen because when we mix the particles with the polymer, elastomer, first, the particles are non-magnetized. That's why they are not magnetically, they cannot aggregate magnetically. Otherwise, that would be very, very negative, right? So that's why at the beginning, they are just particles that you need to distribute well with elastomer matrix. And then only after curing the elastomer, so you cross-link the elastomer so that the particle locations are fixed, then we magnetize them. So that way, we don't get aggregation problems much. However, still the homogeneity of the distributions, as you say, is stochastic. But the good thing about soft systems is they are robust and they are not so sensitive about the aggregation, as long as your dimensions are not too small. Your point is very important when you go 100 micron and 10 micron scale soft device I showed at the end. There, if magnetic values are much different in each particle, you can get a different behavior. So that's why if you look at the last small machine I showed you, indeed, we turn, rather than using many stochastic particles, because also, by the way, other stochastic about particles is their sizes are typically not perfect. So they are a range of sizes. So they are not really uniform sized in typical cases. But for very small devices, what we are doing is now, we take really homogeneous particles with exact size distribution with really well-controlled variation. And then we attach them almost one by one to the polymer matrix so that we precisely control their location. So that's why, you know, as you say, the precision requirement of the magnetic distribution will increase when the machine size gets to cell size scale. But I can say that, as we discussed, mini-scale, there are a lot of applications will do that. We don't have that problem. The second problem about particles is more than the distribution stochasticity is, if your particles are very strong magnetically, and if your polymer matrix is hydrogel, very soft, and then if you go very thin and very small samples, what will happen as a problem is magnetic interactions among particles will be strong enough to induce deformations that is out of your control. So that's why in our designs, we make sure that the magnetic properties of our particles, with compared to the matrix stiffness and distribution roughly, is not so significant. So they are negligible enough that they don't cause extra undesired deformation and coupling. Okay, but those are great points that in the depth details, the particle size distribution, particle spatial distribution, and depends on the polymer matrix. There are many factors we should be careful that at the end, we want to get really minimum coupled and relatively homogeneous and uniform distribution of the particles for most precise, fabrication. But finally, as also previously asked, at the end, it's stochastic system. Any fabrication at the small scale is stochastic. Even you try your best for everything deterministic. So that's why the best approach at the end will be when you fabricate robots, there will be always variations. That's why you have to always go and calibrate and characterize and use machine learning techniques to make sure that you can basically develop techniques that will be kind of adapted to the given robot parameters. So there is no way, I mean, because we have been fabricating tons of micro robots in tons of different approaches. Always there is variation, and that's why if you need repeatable same exact results every time for a given application, you need to do much more adaptive, learning techniques to make sure that you can adapt to given fabrication results. But these are very great points that I didn't mention in detail, but definitely we take care of them very, very closely when we design the robots.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions, Baoxing? We can't hear you, Baoxing. Check your mic.
How about now?
Yeah, you're good now.
How about now? I think
Yeah, you're good now.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. Thank you so much. Just to follow up with a question with the Michael, because I have a similar question about that. So you mentioned that definitely you can change the volume fraction of the particles. But the one thing is for one specific device, when you have the mode transition from walk to jump to turn, you have a fixed volume fraction of your magnetic particles. Do you think this volume fraction, in particular, the volume fraction is very small, say the distance between the particles is small, or the volume fraction is higher than particle distance is very close? The deformation between each particles will affect the transition for the mode from walk to turn to jump, the different deformation mode. This is my first question, John. The second question is, once you have the deformed structure, say, and a specific the magnet of a magnetic field, you have the deformed the shape. Say, if I want to keep the shape, you need to pose your magnetic field, right? So at this stage, whether this stage will be stable to external, say, the stimulus, for example, you apply the force. In this case, if it is stable, on how you can say introduce a different, you mentioned at the beginning, say there's a physical memory of the material, so that this at this stable stage can sustain the mechanical stimulation, like you have applied a hard the push. This maybe can be used for self-sustained structure and your magnetic field for just pose several minutes, but still stable. Can you any thoughts about this? So combination of the stimulation with the physical membrane member of the structures. So this is the first one technical, the second one is just a general.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So for the first one, as you mentioned, and also I think it's related to the previous question, eventually there is definitely a limit of the magnetic particle density. Obvious thing is when you have the density higher and higher, first you increase the rigidity of the system. Don't forget that also when you have a composite material, the effective modulus of the system is highly dependent on the magnetic particle density and distribution. So that's why you can use in a controlled way so that you can induce a stiffness gradient and you can induce many different things, and people are doing it. So we also have sometimes did it. But coming to the assuming that even in that multi-locomotion system, particle distribution was homogeneous, it was more the magnetic profile programming was complex. So in those cases, as you say, like after some critical particle density, first the stiffness will go high. Second is the local interaction will be higher and higher, and there could be aggregations or during this large deformations or undesired behavior. That's why typically there's a limit of magnetic particle component density within a polymer matrix that we went, I think highest is 50% volume, highest. But typically we control it to make sure that mechanically and plus magnetically, we don't induce any undesired non-uniformities or any too much local couplings among the magnetic particles, so that we have an upper limit of the density for a given design of the material, of the magnetic part and the polymer part. So in the second part, as you mentioned, like when we make any shape deformation, typically if the system is not multi-stable design, we need to give the input every time to keep the shape deformation. So an example is, I showed this water meniscus climbing mode of the robot. There, you need to curve your body. We need very small field and energy, but still, to keep that curved shape, we need to always give the input field because it's not stable shape, all right? So that's why it needs a magnetic input energy to keep the curved shape to climb the water meniscus and then change the mode. So in that regard, for the medical device application, I showed the anchoring device application, for example, where we are looking at now multi-stable designs where we need the magnetic input only to change the stable state. And that way, after you give the input and you change the deformation state, now it will have a stable new state. that it can keep with no energy input. That is very important for applications where you want to leave it in the body, and then you don't want to input always energies. All right, so that's why definitely multi-stable mechanisms are highly important for these kind of soft devices to maintain no energy input for specific shape modes. And definitely we are looking at, and its mechanism is typically the best way to do that rather than playing with the material only. So that's why we look at different mechanistic designs to have multi-stable states. And some hyperelastic materials are also multi-stable. We did hyperelastic materials before that can have multiple stable states that we use for some these applications. So yeah, I think that's a great question to explore both hyperelastic type of more advanced materials plus mechanisms to create multi-stable soft designs.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I truly enjoyed this great talk. Thank you so much, John. I finished my question. Yes.
Okay, great. All right, Suck, you're up.
Hello, Metin. Good to see you.
So, how are you?
Good. Gaining some weight. Okay. I really appreciate your wonderful and excellent talk, and then I really like your philosophy on the physical intelligence. My question is quite generous. I mean, I was able to see lots of benefits, useful, practical benefits of your technologies, especially for our society. I'm talking about technology transfer and commercializations. I believe you have lots of experience for that for last more than a decade. Based on your experience, can you just make some comments about the technology transfer strategy, especially for young researchers?
No, that's a great question. John is, I think, also, there are many people also can maybe even answer better than me, but with my given personal experience, it's really definitely a great idea to translate these new technologies into daily life by commercializing through startups. So I have one startup experience, still positive, still doing very well, and we will have new ones coming out. So for startups, it depends on highly your application field. So if you want to get into medical device versus advanced materials versus software IT, every business field of commercial application has very different challenges of creating commercialization. So that's why first thing is you need to really choose the right field that you want to get into commercial. So my previous experience was advanced materials with the gecko additive technology, and now we want to get into medical device ones because we have really a lot of great technologies and also patents. But in medical device, what you immediately find out that everyone can tell that it takes a lot of resource in the sense of investment, in the sense of time, in the sense of approvals, regulations, that you need to really understand all these big picture. And that's my current goal is to do these developments in the at least animal level Amoeba test results within the lab to get prototypes that are really functional with the critical medical problem solved, then go to commercialization rather than make the startup and then trying to find the problem, find the real application. So really, it would be great to push within the lab as much as possible the prototypes and the application that you want to commercialize. That will make life very easy if you do it that way. So then other thing is really creating patents, right patents. So patent filing is an art that most of us never learned. And I learned that there are a lot of bad patents filed because of not much knowing about the claims. So that's why it would be good to learn how to file a patent. I think John has a great expertise there, that if you know about patent law and many things, your science, how to claim your science and invention is really a big art that you need to do correctly. And if you create the right patents and then right timing and the right people, of course, that's the last part, then I think it's fun. But otherwise, it's too much work. That's why I have already some gray hair with the first startup. I want to wait until I'm really ready and have time and energy to go for it because it's a lot of work. But you should do. You are still very young, and again, do the right preparations. And also, microenvironment is a very important last thing. Wherever you are, I think the environment of how people are very supportive of startups. And if the investors and the region you are in is like a Bay Area or Boston or a different area, the success rate is much higher. So that's why, like, I think different institutions have advantage or disadvantage in that regard, so that you need to be aware and make sure that you make your startup in the right location with the right environment. That will make life easier. That's an experience I learned by mistake.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Sok.
Okay, any further questions? This has been a great discussion. I appreciate Metin, you hanging out and answering all these questions. It's been great, really interesting to listen to as well. Are there any other questions? There we go, Marcus.
Hey, Marcus.
Hi, Metin. How are you doing?
Good. How are you? Are you in Boston?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, trying to stay safe. Thank you so much for your talk. It was really, really great. And many of my questions have been already answered. That's just what happens when you're at the very end. That's great. But one of the questions that I still have is, like, how much intelligence goes into the magnetic field creation, and how much intelligence, with insight to physical intelligence, goes into the device? You answered that the ratio of magnetic particles to elastomers is like 50 volume percent. Have you played around with the, and I'm sure you have, like with the entire landscape, and what kind of effects that has on the material attributes and the kinematics of the device, but also how about different gradients, having sections of a material that has different gradients to make the device maybe more intelligent, but maybe to take a little bit of the intelligence from the magnetic field, but a little bit more into the device itself.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a very great point. I tried to show at the beginning, but maybe with a lot of things I showed, it might be not so emphasized that, as you say, there are active and passive components of any soft system that can create complexity. Our passive stiffness is also as important as active actuation and this kind of thing. So in that sense, as you pointed out, of course, we have this active authority from the magnetic field that we can remotely control, that has its own intelligence. But then the material intelligence comes there within the design of particle distribution, as you mentioned, particle distribution, particle magnetic programming that we program and encode to the material. That's the main novelty we brought up. So we said, look, let's encode magnetic programming. That automatically takes care of all the shape change. That my input is very simple, but the complexity comes from the magnetic programming, right? So that was one aspect, that we could create very complex deformations with very simple inputs. The second, as you say, is also the material stiffness gradients. As I tried to show some examples of stiffness anisotropy, can itself, in that case, passively or actively, can even create a more complexity which doesn't need, let's say, another actuation modality. It's just like encoded again into the stiffness property. So that's definitely a second level you can add, because one is you encode to the active material, how much complexity you can encode in the material itself. That actuation simple input can induce complex behavior. Second is, how can you also, in the material and the mechanism and the structure, you can induce another level of passive, especially programming, stiffness programming, damping programming, and many other mechanical programming that can create much adaptive self-behavior that doesn't need even control or actuation. So that just like when there's an external force, they self-adapt. So that's, I think, those are two aspects that we should both, as you say, try to make intelligent. So, but or mainly we want to make the most everything in the robot intelligent. That's where physical intelligence comes, and we want to minimize the complexity of external work. Just externally, we want to get some inputs and some feedback loops, so that if you want to have precision and stuff. So yeah, I think that in that sense, there is a very good space there to play with the active material programming and stiffness programming. And eventually also tunable stiffness and tunable damping. Those are other modalities we can add to even increase the complex behavior more. But that needs energy input, but still doesn't come free, but I think can give us more interesting also other physical behavior.
Thank you.
Okay, if we have one more question, we can go for that, or we could wrap it up here. Let's see, any other questions? If not, I want to thank you again, Metin. That was a really wonderful, inspiring talk. The one concern that I have is tonight, I think I'm going to be dreaming about wriggly, wormy things, swimming around. And I hope it's not a nightmare. That's not a nightmare. It'll be a dream, good dream. Yeah, so, anyway, fascinating stuff. And I appreciate you taking the time to answer all these questions and share with us this wonderful presentation. So I think at this point we'll sign off. Zhigang, do you want to say anything further, or Jimmy?
Jimmy?
Zhigang, your turn.
Jimmy, perhaps you want to say a few words on behalf of EML. We have never used this platform to promote EML at all. You want to say a few words about EML? Tell people what is EML?
John has already mentioned this. So this is a platform that this journal Extreme Mechanics Letters created to enable the researchers to exchange information, and turns out to be very successful. Certainly, I'd like to thank Zhigang for coming up with the idea to do this, and also thanking all the people attending these webinars. And we do have that every Wednesday. So keep that in mind, that if you don't receive the advertising material, don't worry about that. Just sign up, same account number. Every Wednesday we'll have one. Another thing I want to say is I'd like to thank Metin today in particular for wonderful, wonderful talk. Let's give him another round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, John. All right, that's it.
Yeah, thanks very much for John and everyone. So thank you guys.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.